Welcome everybody, we're live. This is our exciting annual UIL judge training, and we're excited to talk to all the area judges. I am Jerry Miller, and really looking forward to talking with you. I'll let Mark introduce himself.
Mark McGahee. Jerry and I have been working on this for the last several years, and it's been great to see the progress the last couple of years, especially with the training and getting the adjudicators ready for the area and the state contests.
And so I want to tell you a little bit about what today is going to be. So we're going to do the first couple of hours, and these are just our new judges. Now, if you're a returning judge and you're with us, we're excited to have you. You're welcome to hang and listen and just kind of take part and comment on anything that you need. But otherwise, this is really going to be intended for folks who have not judged area before. Now, of course, if you're at the area round, you've already done really well at area. You've been invited by UIL to kind of serve as an area adjudicator, and so it certainly is my hope that you have the opportunity to just kind of dive in and learn a lot in the next couple of hours with us. We probably won't take all the way till 3 o'clock with our new judges. We'll probably go to about 2:45, 2:50. We'll take a brief pause, and then we'll resume with all judges starting around 3 p.m. So with that, if you want to comment and say that you're here, we'd love to hear from you. You can just click on that comment box, and we'll be able to see you and be able to read your comments. But again, really excited to have you here and excited to dive right in. If you'll go ahead forward into that first video with Dr. Kent. Dr. Kent has an introduction for all of our returning judges.
Hello. My name is Brad Kent, and I serve as the State Director of Music for the University Interscholastic League in Texas. On behalf of the over 1,000 competing marching bands in our state, I would like to thank each of you for your service as an adjudicator. One of UIL's missions, along with the Texas Music Adjudicators Association, is to provide the best possible evaluations for the marching bands in Texas. As part of this process, we have partnered with TMAA to provide annual training via webinar for our marching band adjudicators. I would like to extend special appreciation to TMAA UIL Marching Band Liaison, Jerry Miller, for his leadership in this project. We hope you find the information to be helpful and informative as you prepare for the upcoming adjudication season. Thank you.
All right, and thanks to Dr. Kent. Love seeing all of you checking in, so thanks for saying hello. Lots of great names here. So we're going to dive into the first few items we're going to cover are going to be just kind of some rough guidelines that I think that we're all plenty aware of, but Mark and I will just kind of cover these with you. I'm going to slide my computer over so he can see that as well, but I'll take the first slide, maybe he can take the second, and we'll just kind of bob back and forth. But these are all things that we train every adjudicator on region, area, and state level, even concert band and mariachi and all the divisions. The first thing I want to stress to you is that the adjudication for that group needs to be based solely on the performance of the day, not the past reputation of that group, not of the director. Everything that we're doing is based solely on that day. Be consistent. If for some reason, just, it's coming back from a break, something bothers you during that, just there's parents right in front of you being really noisy, just if you make a mistake, start over. With Competition Suite, you have the opportunity to go back, to redress anything that didn't work, to fix a number, to adjust it later. Do your best to be consistent over the course of the day. We would rather have one mistake than have that one mistake cartwheel into 3 or 4 or 5 or 10. Refrain from talking to other judges until you've marked anything down. Know that at a lot of area contests, that group will finish on the field and those parents will stand up. It's just normal. They're going to clap for their group, and a lot of times they'll turn around and see what the judges are. They'll look in your face. They'll try and interpret by your face, like, what did you like? What did you not like? So those are all things that I think are worth talking about. I'm going to let Mark kind of do a few of these, other than if there's anything on there you want to reflect on.
Sure. Especially as they're looking at your face, they're like, I watched the judge, and I think they liked you because they were smiling at the end. And again, it's not true one way or another. You're just able to kind of discern that and put your numbers down. We have 5 divisions that are used on the UIL scale of excellence. When we have these ratings. Again, you have groups at the area level, you're probably going to have many of them in the above average categories. To get to that level, there has to be some level of excellence. And so as they're progressing towards that, you don't have to feel like you have to use all 5, but again, it's being able to have those as a luxury if you do need those.
Well, and to chime in, remember that the area level at Region, we don't have always. You know, we use that always descriptor, and we'll get some more into this, but we use that only at area and state because ostensibly a group at Region probably isn't always yet.
Correct.
I mean, I don't know that any of mine ever were. Like, it's not something that's going to quite be ready. But with that, too, I hope you're not seeing the rarelies because for them to have advanced and rarely be able to do these things, they likely got caught at the region level and made a second division. So, sorry.
Great point. Using the rubric and the placemat when you are doing your adjudication, we're going to discuss this. Hopefully you've seen copies of this so far. That it is my guide when I judge. I'm able to refer to this constantly. Again, rather than just kind of subjectively thinking I like this style a lot, or they were the loudest group, or something I really liked how the show was put together. That's secondary, but using really the set of metrics that have been established by UIL and TMAA to be able to say, let's go ahead and structure this accordingly, and now let's put you in the box area which we think this particular performance that day actually occurred. Justify your score. Again, rating in specific language in your recording. None of us as teachers wanted to receive glowing remarks on a recording. That's great, outstanding. Think about superlatives that were in the top category, and then the score didn't reflect it. It was at something that was in the excellent category or in the good category, and vice versa, where someone is being overly tough, and then it's hard to get a read on them, and then suddenly their numbers, because it does seem like they're arbitrarily putting something down. Make the commentary match what you're able to put out in the score, so it does kind of match up with above average comments, above average score. Again, for using paper sheets, which
we really, I think last year we had one area left on paper sheets, and as of this week, we have none.
That's great.
So a
wood,
good
right?
development in the UIL front is that I think everybody's off of paper sheets. So as of this week, we can now skip that comment and go on.
That's great. If it's a backup, you'll know to write professionally. But great, we've hopefully all evolved to competition suite. Speak of as an administrator was hearing this, and also speak of students will hear it. You want to create an educational archive, a record where it's something they could play for the ensemble and able to get something about it, and also feel good about themselves. And for an administrator to go, wow, this is great that we think we're thought of so highly at this level, as well as, oh, okay, I thought, I liked our group. I wasn't sure about this other group I've only seen before. And you can actually maybe hear that reflected in the comments where there's many great things said, but maybe, hey, focus on these particular areas of concern as you continue to progress through the comment, and then maybe it'll match up. And I think it's something that really creates, it completes the circle of what an educational opportunity this could be for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a few more things on this next slide. Justify your score by the comments you speak. Think about it this way. As a director, and all of you on here are veteran directors who've done well in the area round, you get your recordings now pretty quickly. Like your band comes off the field. Within 5 or so minutes, you can listen to that. My aim as a judge is when you listen to my file, it indicates pretty clearly what score you're going to expect. If I'm using the word usually as opposed to consistently, and they're synonyms, right? If I'm using consistently and lots of synonyms with consistently, your score is probably going to be into that 4th box. And if I say, wow, trumpets, you were just always this, always that, then you're probably going to see some trending toward that box 5. Whereas if you're hearing usually the silks go around together, usually the drum line, if you're hearing that, then chances are things are going to be more inside of that box. So aim to have your score and your comments aligned before they ever get the recap in that director's meeting. Address everything on the comment sheet. If you're judging music, it's a lot. You got to cover woodwinds and brass. You've got to cover percussion and ensemble, and you've got to cover content. It's a lot to talk about. So just be sure, kind of the way that I think through it, and I don't know if your process is similar, but kind of at the end of every production, when they get to those logical breaks as you're moving into a ballad type production or whatnot, I'll just be like, I haven't said anything to the percussion yet.
Right, haven't commented, yes.
So just dive back in and figure out what that needs to be.
And along with that, we want all students to be valued. That's going to be discussed a little bit later. All students are contributing to the performance. It'd be great for them to get a shout out, and it's something where they're addressed, and also constructive along the ways. But you're being noticed on the field, musically or visually, and we're able to say, thank you for your contribution, and we want everyone to be able to say they contributed that day.
Yeah, absolutely. Lastly, I put on here, just keep your mobile phone out of sight when judging. I have mine sitting here on the table. Like, be sure that as you're judging, kind of put it face down, get it out of the way. You don't ever want to be referencing it while you're trying to judge a group. So just kind of be mindful of that as the day goes on. On this next slide, I'll do this first one, and then I'll let you dive in on those other ones. But the most important thing, that if there's like a real takeaway of this area around, is that there is no official style for marching band in Texas. I often tell the story that years ago when I was teaching at the drum corps, we had one of the original drum majors from like the 1930s come out, and very old man, he's in his 90s, and he watched a little bit of the show, and we said, what surprises you the most about drum corps now? He had been away from the activity for 50, 60 years, and he said, oh, people marching backwards. I never thought I would see that, and I was like, oh, okay, that's what shocked him.
It's progressive.
Here's the thing. There are groups that are going to come out with a military marching band approach. There's that milli-corps that's like military, but a little bit of corps style. There's corps style groups. There are going to be show bands. There might be a group doing a style that I haven't mentioned or that's undefined. I think it's so important that as area adjudicators, we are open to whatever a program wants to bring. We're not like, oh, this is always going to outscore this. No, that doesn't exist. I'm open to whatever you want to share with me for those 8 minutes, and I'm excited, and whatever you share with me is going to, I'm sure, inform my practice.
Tied in with that on the second bullet point, it does. What I love about this is, again, there's no prescribed level of this. There's lots of choices. There's lots of ways of doing this, and it's whether it be the strengths of the ensemble or someone, an ensemble or a director or a designer trying to do something creative and innovative. They're all making choices. Each of these programs do have an equal opportunity. It can't be, oh, I thought about this. I judged this group 10 years ago, and I always think about this. Or I happened to see them at another contest, and I'm probably going to predict this. Again, you're judging the show of the day. The show that's ensemble, and you must be able to say maybe it's not your forte or your certain style that you would maybe this type of music they're using, but are they doing it at a great level? Is it innovative? Is it have something where there's lots of excellence? And again, you should be able to credit that on a much more broad scale for sure.
Another thing to think about, and this will be a mantra of today's training, is recognizing, measuring, and rewarding achievement. And it's really a 3-step process. We're going to talk about impression, analysis, comparison as well, but this is another way to think through it. You're watching the field. You recognize a low brass feature. I recognize the low brass feature. I open with that comment. Low brass in this feature moment. You measure it. In your mind, you're thinking, how well is this being done? Now, how well is it being done from a scale of 1 to 1,000, 1 to 100, however you want to kind of think through that in your mind? How well is it being done? And then rewarding it when the moment ends. And that does mean you probably can't talk over all of it. Like, you have to just kind of let the show come to you, be quiet, let that low brass moment happen, recognize, measure, reward, and then moving on. I'm going to take this last one real quick because it's quick, but just report any discrepancies to the contest chair. Don't mention it on your file. We don't know what went into why an adult went up to the soundboard. We don't know. As judges, that is not our business. That is something between the contest chair and that band director, right? So it's not our role to run the contest. There are individuals who are there to do it. Now, if you observe something that you think is a little out of the ordinary, something that sits uncomfortably with you, then you do need to go to that executive secretary just in a very quiet manner and just say, hey, I noticed with XYZ High School, this thing happened. I didn't know if that's something you all discussed, but just if that were to advance to finals tonight, if that were to advance to state prelims, I think they should check in. A-okay, that's an absolute role to play as a judge, but it can't enter into our scoring or our commentary. If we see something in our minds that might be a rules violation, let the contest chair and those folks handle that.
Great point.
Let's go ahead.
Sure. Continue with our last few bullet points. Remember, we are teachers first and judges second. Most of us got in this activity as a performer, and then hopefully evolved as an instructor and a teacher, an educator, director, and think about the role that the the journey that group has been on, to be able to learning the sets and the performances, and the ups and downs, and learning how to handle adversity, and just as many chances as you can to celebrate and praise that. I think it's really important. And put yourself back in their shoes again. Sometimes it gets to be a little bit sterile, where we kind of forget what it's like, and especially like, oh yeah, it's been more than 100 degrees for lots of days out this summer, and just the areas of adversity that all groups have been working with. Just try to put yourself in that perspective that this is a great educational opportunity.
Yeah, our concern is the welfare and growth of the students. That is what we're about as an organization, and as judges. None of us got into band directing to become judges. Right. We got into band directing, we became successful through that model. If you're on this podcast, you're somebody who's been successful through this model. So now that we know that success is happening, you're giving back. You're giving back to programs who are rebuilding and programs who are doing really well and all of these things. So just kind of be mindful of that. All right, going on to the next slide. Let's talk a little bit about before, during, and after the show. What are some just practical things that you as a new area adjudicator should be aware of? And this is kind of like a good assessment, a good checklist. If you want to write some of this down, you can. I do want to mention in the comments in the dialogue box below, you can see in there, I've shared for you a number of things that have I'm going to flip over there for just a second as we pause here inside of the live stream. But there's some comment sections that allow you to, I can't see it here, that allow you to see some of the links, like the links for today. It has the quizzes. It's going to have some documents that we might reference. It has copies of all the score sheets. So I don't want you to be afraid to kind of dive into those and see those kind of as you see fit going forward. Let's do like that. We can see some more things. Great. We're going to go on from there. Sorry, I'm making this screen look as great as I can based on our circumstances today.
A few technical difficulties to get started with.
Yeah, we were sprinting into the start today. So before we judge, we need to assess our environment. Familiarize yourself with the surroundings. Does the recorder work? Nowadays, we're all using tablets, or maybe we're using a handheld that you turn in. You might be even using a phone. I know there's a few regions that are utilizing that. There's always a recording test group. You can record for that recording test group as many times as you want. If you want to be really savvy, you can log in on the judge side on your device, and you can actually listen to what you just recorded for the test group and hear your voice and make sure that it's all coming through.
Simple things along with this, if it's handheld or if it's an attached microphone, make sure you're speaking in the correct end of the microphone. It is something that makes a difference, especially if it's an environment that traps sound in a media video level. It could be where you hear more of the group and less of you talking, like you sound really distant, and it's just putting a little mark on there. I need to talk into this side of it. Maybe eat it where it's all close together, and they'll let you know. You'll get to hear that file that plays back if it's going to work. 'Cause it's one thing to speak when there's no ensemble performing, and then when the electronics crank up and there's the first big hit by the brass section, what does it still sound like in relationship to that?
Yeah, and I'm one that I have the Judge app on my device so that I'm recording on the device that all the areas, generally have a device they give you, but I'll pull it up on my device and just listen to myself on my own phone, because that's what the directors are hearing. So if you're not sure how to do that, we're going to do at the very end, the last thing we do before we sign off today, kind of a competition suite crash course. If you're anxious about that and you want to practice, you can send me an email, and I have a practice contest almost every day of the week as of late. I'll make you a judge on the practice contest that day, and you can go in and practice. There's a McGahee High School, there's a Miller High School, there's a Brad Kent High School, and a Gabe Musella High School. You can practice with all of our schools, and then we'll see how you're doing. And that's an easy way for you to go back and test it and make sure that you feel comfortable with the interface. Always begin by identifying yourself, name of the contest, where you are in relation to the field, I think is important. Side one, side two. That way, if you're getting way too much of maybe a flute solo, and the folks on side two aren't commenting on that, maybe they can be aware that the panning inside of that is a little bit off. And always, address the area that you're judging, music or visual. With area, 80% of you are going to flip. You're going to judge music in prelims and visual in finals, or vice versa. There's one judge who will stay. But for the most part, most of you, especially as new adjudicators, I can almost guarantee you are one of the flip people.
Some of the intangibles in those days, it could be extremely hot. It's worth kind of mentioning. So let's say we're all aware that there could be some pitch discrepancies because the temperature is in the 90s. Just kind of addressing in the beginning, boy, it's a hot afternoon here. We know you're going to be working really hard to try to get everything to match, or the wind seems to be a little stronger today. Color guard, hang in there. We know you're going to have a few challenges, and I know that you're making allowances towards that. Just something in a real brief kind of part of your commentary that addresses it, so they know that you're aware of it, just like that they are.
Yeah, let's go on. The recorded commentary should provide accountability for evaluation, should provide constructive criticism, and useful information to encourage improvement. Additionally, though, too, and I think that goes without saying, but additionally, the tone needs to be helpful and geared for student listening. It can sometimes be a problem if later in the show, later in the contest, I'm saying, we could get a little bit annoyed, we could be a little bit, whatever that is, leave the tone out of it. Every group, just as Mark said earlier, every group begins with the opportunity for success. By the same, our commentary for every group needs to feel very level over the course of it. Every group, you can kind of take on that role like every group begins with a 100. You hear teachers say that. Every student begins the semester with 100. Every group begins in first place when they step on, but things happen over the course of the show. But I don't let that impact my tone. It's just I try to be helpful, but at the same time, if we're making those comments, like that's what's going to kind of pull that down some. You want to talk a little bit about judging through time?
Sure. In judging through time, if you haven't heard that expression before, let's say there's big moments in the show and it happens early and you react to it. Let's say it's something really, really positive. That's great. That's one of hopefully some future things that are going to happening. All the way until the final horns down or the last visual movement, you are evaluating all of this. So the hopefully the performance has built-in moments that have highs and lows to them, but the performance shouldn't fizzle out at the end. An example is if the group gets really tired. Let's say over the course of that, you do have to consider that where maybe something gets a little sideways with the tempo, or you hear people really especially not following through and connecting their musical phrases to the visual phrase. You are hopefully like you're building success where it's almost like a crescendo of momentum, not necessarily a volume, but the show is getting stronger, the energy is getting stronger, and they have just as many memorable moments at the end of the show as they did at the very beginning of the show or even in the middle. And over the course of that, there's an arc that hopefully is something you can recognize and be able to say, I love this, and especially at the end, I like how you brought the whole thing together.
Yeah, absolutely. Lastly, unlike, for example, the concert division, which all of us have taken our groups to concert contest, where the writing is the primary method of communication, it's important to note in this format, the recorded is the only information, especially with the advent of the written sheet kind of sunsetting. Really now all they have is our recorded commentary. And so I think it puts pressure on us because, again, if we write something, I mean, I would never write this, but, clarinets were terrible today. Oh, my gosh, erase that. I'm just angry. And then I would go back and redo that. The downside on the recording is, like, once it's out there, it's out there. Yeah. So you just have to be really mindful of what you say. And that's, I think, an even further statement of let the show come to you. Don't feel like you have to rush in and say everything really quickly. Like, let that come your way. Have the moment. The high brass feature happens. You listen to it. You react, recognize, measure, reward, pause, take in the next moment. You're not going to get to evaluate 100% of the show, but in an ideal world, maybe 75, 80% of it you can catch, but you're going to miss a percent. That's okay because your quality feedback is really important. How we say is as important as what we're saying. We have to think about our tone.
Don't think that dead air time is a bad thing. The best adjudicators I know there'll be a moment they're able to not be trying to talk over it. No one's expecting you to say, oh, I have to catch everything. You are catching everything, but you're going to address it when the appropriate time happens rather than feel like you have to keep saying, oh, I have to keep saying something over and over. And just learn to pace yourself. Like I said, let the show come to you. Give a proper comment at the right time, but make sure it's thorough when you do make that statement.
Yeah, let's go on to the next slide. While we judge, in terms of recorded commentary, as we said, it's not easy to listen while talking. So try and keep your comments succinct and to the point. If you have let's say you want to really dive into articulation with a particular group, you feel like that's their big area for growth. Great. Just write yourself a note. So I write, McGahee High School, and then I write articulation on a little notepad. And then at the end of the performance, I'll look down at that and I'll be like, hey guys, before I go, I want to just take a minute here to really address articulation with you. I noticed that you're, tonguing really heavy in these louder moments, whatever that might be. Don't try and get into that where you end up missing a bunch of moments. If you have an explanation that you know is going to take you a second to process your thoughts with them, just scribble it down on a little scratch pad, come back to it later, and that way everybody gets the information, but they also don't feel like, boy, you didn't address anything in the ballad. She skipped all of our ballad stuff because she was talking about the volume of the percussion in the opener. We really want to be sensitive to that. And remember, too, you don't have that long until the next band is coming on. Right. The sunsetting of the sheets helps tremendously. You're not having to write the full sheet, but you are still having to formulate your numbers and track all of that. And we're going to talk in our second half of today's broadcast about managing numbers and how to do those things. So you do have some math work to do, but at the same time, it's not the pressure it used to be to fill out these long sheets. So take a minute if you have some long form stuff to share with them.
Yeah, and the recap you have, of course, needs to paint a very specific snapshot to what you heard earlier. Don't feel like you have to go on and on and on, but we had some quick summations. And then as you wrap that up again, like you said, the numbers then become your critical focus, and you should be able to kind of reflect on what you said. The words I was using usually, most of the time, consistently, what was I saying most of the time? And then that should help you then hone in how you're going to see how that bridges the gap to then how do you put the number down.
A few more things. We're on to the next slide here is the words we use need to match the descriptors. And we've talked about scoring specific language. We're going to dive into that really deeply here in just a little bit. It is possible, and maybe we're all, I think, guilty of this at some point, dismissing the remarks of a judge based on maybe one disagreeable thing. And I think that's where it's really important that helpful tone is just really everywhere in our commentary. We also, and I said this earlier, can't allow ourselves to just get weighed down by later groups. There was one years ago that I did where I think there were 40 bands that day in prelims, and then another, I think it was back when we were doing 10 in finals. Wow. So it was 40 and 10, so it was a 50 band day. So the first group was on the field at 7 or 7:15, and it's just like what they experienced and what I experienced as a judge too from that 7:15. We all know we've had the 7:15 performance slot at something, and what it takes to get. But same thing for us as a judge. We have to do that, but then we also have to perform every 15 minutes with only a couple of little breaks. Yeah, we're not out there moving around, but at the same time, our brain and our mouth is working for all that time. So just kind of be conscious of your tone throughout the day and make sure that if somebody were to side by side listen to a group from your first block and a group from your last block, that you have a really even, consistent tone as you say that.
When group 40 comes out on the field, even though you're just like, wow, I'm kind of whipped here, remember that group's opportunity, that's still their first time. Yeah. And so you need to be able to sound like this is your first time, which it is for that ensemble, rather than the length of the day or where it is in relationship to how many groups you've seen.
Lastly, let's talk about the moment of decision. When we get to that, formulate a score that reflects your appraisal of that. And we're going to talk about kind of how to manage your numbers over the course of the day. But one of the things I want to invite you to do is think about historically in that classification. Let's pick class 3A. Inside of 3A, what does an area finalist look like in your mind? Chances are you've been given that assignment because you know that. And here's the thing that didn't exist 15 years ago. If you're a little unsure about 3A, go watch some YouTube videos. Go watch some 3A state videos from previous years. Obviously, we don't want those programs and all that to have any advantage in your mind because they might have been at state, but if nothing else, get a sense for what really high-achieving 3As look like in our state. If that's a classification, maybe you're like, well, Jerry, I taught 3A, but it's been 10 years. I've been teaching 5A for the last 10 years. Go back and look at some 3A and just kind of refocus yourself before the gig to get things where they want to be. At the end of the day, though, that placemat is going to steer you through the day. And so we're almost at a place. We've got one more kind of unit to cover before we dive into that. Anything else just on the commentary and the formulation of a score?
No, I think that helps out. And do reflect on these, especially leading up a week before you go judge, the day before, as you're really thinking about just being physically prepared and mentally prepared.
And I have some exemplars. I've shared them in those important links for the day. Now that we're using Competition Suite, because we have that archive, we have so many exemplars available to you. I think there's at least a dozen or more area exemplars now again, it's a lot of 2A, 4A, 6A right now, just because those were the groups that were advancing onto state last year. Right. So it's a little more 2A, 4A, 6A heavy. But there are some 5As. I'm going to go back and pull some 3As from last year, but just trying to give you some ideas as far as What do those judges sound like on that? And the exemplars run the gamut from the group that won the area to the group that just missed finals to a group that was definitively not in finals and only performed in prelims, to just try and help you hear that tone and try to choose some great judges inside of that. As we continue to work, just be sure that you're always sharpening the saw. Listen to the recordings of your group over the years that impacted you positively. What about it really helped you? I mean, I cite this every year. There's a Randy Vaughn one that I need to put it in the exemplars. I'm sure I have it. Mm-hmm. It's probably 14 years ago, but it was just one of those where everything he said was invested in the growth of the kids. He caught the positives and he rewarded those. He caught the negatives and he said those in a way that helped us improve the next week. So, find some of those out there that you're like, this recording really helped us grow. Practice with your own group. Sometimes you might say, well, Jerry, I'm in rehearsal, like I'm so focused on the group, I can't. Fine, like use a video of your group then. I'm sure you have a parent who videos it or a staff member who videos it. Do that. And I say listen to exemplars, we'll hear 3. I've updated that. I think we're going to hear like 6 or 7 in the second half of today. So you're going to get to hear some good exemplars. We're not going to listen to the full 8-minute file, but we're going to listen to minute and a half snippets of some of those exemplars. And hopefully I get you thinking about exemplars. What else on sharpening the saw?
Well, in the practicing with ensembles that are either on YouTube or different recordings, when I first started doing this, I would stumble and I would have to push pause and going, I sound like an idiot. I just can't put my words together, and then I would have to kind of go back. This is just me practicing, but trying to get it going from the thought to actually become a narration, and then the organizing of the ideas, trying to make sure it's very succinct, trying to make sure you're not talking over moments. And it is a skill. If you practice it, you'll learn. There's a pacing, there's a rhythm that happens, but learning again to kind of let things kind of come to you and be able to listen, it does happen. So do work on it.
Yeah. On the next slide, watch and listen to some other venues. Bands of America, DCI, WGI. Just familiarize yourself with what's going on in the activity. As I said, there's going to be a group this year. I don't know who they're going to be, but they're going to push the envelope in that class. They're going to show us something we've not previously seen for that classification, and they're going to push us out of our comfort zone as judges. Listening to and seeing other venues that push us a little bit can be really good, and have an open mind. There is no particular style. I think that if a group goes out there and they present an opening that's all military, and then they go into a core style ballad and they do a show style closer, like I'm fine. Present whatever you feel maximizes your students in that opportunity, and I want to be here to comment on it and help you grow in that direction that you're taking your program. We're going to move into judging ethics, and this is kind of the last unit before we get to the sheets. In the region training, for those of you who've been through that, we do a much longer form discussion of this, but this is going to be just inside of these few bullet points, a little bit about ethics, and I apologize, I'm going to read a lot of this first one to you. But affiliation, a judge can't adjudicate a contest with an ensemble in which he or she has an affiliation. So inside of this, a formal affiliation would be if you are the head director, assistant director, not likely that you would be called the judge, but drill designer, music arranger, show designer, or coordinator. Even if that was last year you wrote their drill, 2 years ago you did their music, you need to disclose that to that UIL executive. You can send it to me and let me know, especially at the area round. It's not going to, and I want to stress this to you, it doesn't mean you're going to lose your assignment. It just may mean I ask you to trade areas with somebody. And I may go on and say, hey, do you have any conflicts in area B? Oh, you don't? Okay. Well, I'm going to have you switch with the person, so we're going to switch area B and C, or in DFW either way, for instance. A secondary affiliation, too, is something to watch, like somebody who's a family member. If your brother leads a program, if your cousin, if your
son-in-law.
Yeah. I mean, the one that came up most recently was somebody's son-in-law was leading a program and they were going to be assigned a judge. And it's like, we want to know that. That may not be something that triggers for us. You have different last names. And so just kind of be mindful of those things and watch for those. And if you have any, the easiest way to tell right now is you can go to that area website and you can see the draw order. Almost all of them. I've been looking lately. Almost everybody has their draw order posted. Just read down that list and be like, yeah, I don't have any conflicts here. If you do, again, don't be afraid that, I'm going to lose my area assignment. I've worked hard to get to this level. It's my first time being asked. I'm just going to trade with you. I'm just going to ask you to swap. So please don't put yourself or that director in that uncomfortable situation where you're having to judge a group that you have an affiliation with.
Jerry, let me get your opinion on this. So let's say the ensemble, the same group we're discussing, ask you to come out to a pre-UIL. A lot of groups, they have exhibition performances, and they want you to do a recording, and they've asked you to do this in early October, and lo and behold, that same ensemble is set up to where they're going to be at an area contest. Is that something you need to report that immediately? I mean, what your level of contribution is? I know that's kind of a gray area.
Yeah,
so what do you think on that?
What we've said, and I know when people have reached out to Dr. Kent on this, the comment that they've received is, if you're directly working with the kids, if you're just providing commentary at a pre-UIL, you're talking into a recorder, you press stop, and that's the only contact you have with the group, that's fine. You can still judge that group at area. But if you go out and actually do a clinic where you're handed the microphone, you're like, hey, trumpets, can we do this here? And let's try this here. Yeah, if you get into that level, you're now, in my mind, you're now in a place where you're affiliated with that group.
You're contributing to the success, yeah. Okay.
And so just kind of be mindful of that. I know for me, when I was judging a bunch of areas, like I would just, and you get the call, and you would even say, because I'll be honest, if I knew that I was going down to Area D and somebody in Area D said, could I come do a pre-UIL or something like that, it may not be to their advantage to have you. I mean, I know some of us think, oh, well, they got the advantage. They knew what he or she thought ahead of time. And it's like, yeah, but I also saw your show. And now I'm going to, and I know that ballad fell apart when I saw you a month ago. So guess what? I'm going to be listening. So you see what I'm saying? Like, I think there's a double-edged sword to it. And so I think the best route is, if you're having any contact with kids over the course of that judging assignment, then you need to say, I have a conflict. If you're just making a file and sending it on, and then I think that is A-okay. So we talked about consultation. Prior to adjudication, we also can't give technical or programming advice. So this would be a scenario where a band director says, hey, Mark, would you mind watching my video from Friday night or from this contest I went to on Saturday and giving me some notes? That you have to say, hey, I'm so sorry. I would love to help you this year. I'm judging your area. I'm going to hold off at this time. Right. So just that kind of goes in that same vein. But even if you, in this modern era, there are people who send, I'm sure you receive some, I receive, they'll ask for help. Can you watch my video and give me some notes? I'm happy to help you. But once I do that, I can't judge your group at area because I've contributed to the design process. If I say you should move the color guard here, you should bring this percussion moment down. Right. When it comes to bias, just be mindful that we cannot publicly display any interest or preference towards a group. Publications, clinics, and I'm going to focus on social media in a second, but let's just say that you judge an area and you see this group that wins the area and they are lights out. You're like, there's no way that I didn't just see the state champion. Like, that was incredible. Right. I'm going to post as I'm driving, as I'm waiting at the airport to get my flight back home, I'm going to post like, wow, McGahee High School for the win this year. There's no way anybody's going to crush them. The impression becomes that that's what UIL thinks, that's what TMAA thinks. But in reality, what you've done is you've created a situation that's very tense for that program and that director, positively and negatively. And so the best thing to do is to never infer bias in a public way. If they say, hey, Mark, you judged Area C, what did you think? You say, I saw some great groups this weekend. Lots of positives. Things are going well.
I'm sure you saw my numbers, so they are.
Yeah, my numbers said everything you needed to say. The social media front. We just need to be so aware that any commentary made with respect to UIL, participating groups, it's monitored. It gets, especially if it's negative, it gets screenshot and it gets shared. In the eyes of the community, when we show up, we're not working for UIL Area D. We're working for UIL. That's all they think.
That's all they know, yeah.
These guys are UIL employees, and they're coming up and they're on their phones and they're posting stuff. Or even if maybe there's something that you agree or disagree with policy-wise. Maybe you want the shows, the 15-minute, the 8 minutes, with the 5, 8, and 2. Maybe you want that to change. This is not the place to say, I judged area, and with another minute, I could have made a better call. I don't know why we don't make it a 9-minute show. Like, those are the kind of things that you're in the employ of a UIL area. So if we have concerns, there are pathways through the Marching Band Rules Advisory Committee, through that executive secretary, that you can share your concerns. Social media is not going to be your place. What else about social media do we need to be watchful of?
If it's something where, try not to post ahead of time, this is my office for today. Sometimes that can be taken differently. Like, I think this thing is perfect, so get ready. I think the state champions from here. Or let's say it happens to be an area where, maybe the press box isn't as high as you thought, and it's an extra hot day, and well, I can't believe the challenges we're going to have today there, which is putting a negative slant on anyone there where it has nothing to do with the level of the band's performance, and then someone think maybe the champion from that group is not deservedly have a chance to be able to, at the state contest. So it's best just not to say it. Maybe take it, then after the contest, hey, I had a great experience, and here's what it looked like 2 weeks ago, or 2 weeks earlier.
Yeah. When it comes to integrity, let's go on to the next slide. When it comes to integrity, it should be clearly understood that we have a mutual respect for the opinions of others. Mark and I might be on the same panel. We might both be judging music. I may have the group in box 4. He may have them in box 3. If I have a concern about another judge's call, it is not the time and place to publicly air that. Right. It is not even something where I should be having some sort of conflict with that judge. Rather, it is the opportunity to talk with that executive secretary and say, hey, I have some concerns about what I'm seeing here. Now, you're not seeing other judges' scores until the whole thing is over, but if there is a concern, there are pathways. You can reach out to Brad Kent in his office. You can reach out to me on the TMAA front, and we're more than happy to take that under advisement if you see a judge who's maybe practicing something that you feel is unethical. If it's unethical in the moment and you feel it needs to be handled, that executive, that area executive, they're there for that day. So just kind of be mindful of your approach to integrity in that we don't want to broadcast so-and-so is checked out all day, or I disagreed, or have a public disagreement with another judge while you're at lunch over a group.
Well, and use the verbiage, should discreetly contact. Maybe you don't have all of the facts. Maybe something that appears like they're on their phone and someone's giving them the score from downstairs really isn't it. Maybe they have an issue at home with a family member, and it just happens to appear that way. So make sure you just talk privately, and then again, you've said your piece. The executive secretary, the person running the contest, that's their call then from there, that point.
Right. So we're going to move into philosophy now on this next slide. And when we're talking about philosophy, what we're going to talk about here is our last piece before we get to the sheets. And again, it usually takes us about an hour or so to cover kind of these, I would call them 30,000-foot view. Let's make sure that we've taken care of introducing you to the adjudication process. If you've been through the region training, you're like, yeah, Jerry, I've heard a lot of what you said, and philosophy will feel similar, but it has a little bit of an area lens to it. We're going to kind of turn a corner here in a little bit, so thanks for kind of staying with us as we establish this over these 3 slides. So let's talk about, in this next slide, which is the philosophy of adjudication, number 1. The achievement level, as displayed by the performers at a given contest, is the sole basis for evaluation. Nothing else, not the reputation of the group, not the reputation of that band director previously, nothing else but the performance of the day. Now, how do we earn our score? Achievement results from 2 considerations, simultaneous considerations. Number 1 is going to be content, responsibilities. What's asked of the performer? What drill are they marching? What music are they playing? How is it staged? How is it performed? And the extent to which the students are doing what's been assigned. Unlike concert contests, where I choose to play a grade 5 piece with my ensemble, that grade 5 piece has very few negotiables. I'm sure, if you go, my English horn player is maybe not going to be able to do this, I'm going to rewrite it on saxophone, or so, okay, fine and good. But within the marching activity, these directors, and as many active directors yourselves, you chose the literature, you chose the drill, you chose the choreography.
Chose the soloist.
Yeah, you chose that soloist, you chose those percussion parts. Those are all things that you own as a director. If I have a concern about the content, for example, that flute solo is it's over the head of that child, and I would say it in a nicer way, then that's a content concern, as opposed to that trumpet solo is well playable, that student just didn't have the best day. Again, I wouldn't say it like that, but those are more concerns of achievement. Each judge in our role is simultaneously considering both. If a moment misses, if a moment just doesn't land, was the moment too hard for the kids, right? The old saying, you're never too old to overprogram. Are they just overprogrammed? Or was it just a performance issue today where just like a couple of things got missed and the battery wasn't handing the time?
Electronic sound was executed late and people were waiting for that.
So I think we have to think of that what and how balance, and we're constantly on that little seesaw there, right? Where we're just like, when things go wrong, but also when things go really well, a group maximizes, not only was this an incredibly challenging moment, but it was performed at an incredibly high level. And those are the Those are the things that we want to see lots of. Now, each band can make a wide variety of choices. As we've said, the system encourages and rewards the groups that really do branch out and try to make these choices. The scoring system is designed to encourage those groups, innovation and artistry, whether they choose to do that through the show band language, the core style language, military language, or some hybrid in between those. The innovation and artistry are what is valued, but it also is about a carefully balanced variety. And I think that's important too. Inside of a military band performance, you're not going to hear all marches at the same tempo and the same style. You're not going to hear the same instruments featured again and again at area. You want to hear a group that shows the well-roundedness of everything.
As the old expression goes, we want to use all the crayons in the crayon box.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just going back to the same 2 or 3, whether it be voicing, the way the music's put together, or in the emotions they're trying to this music reflects this. It has a neat samba style, then it's followed by something else, but yet it all still fits into maybe an overall theme if that's what they've gone to go with. So we're looking for the variety within bounds.
Yeah. Over to adjudication number 3. When scoring provides tools for teaching and positive criticism with the goal of improving each and every program in Texas, the proper use of the system will provide that educational value, right? It allows each band to have its own identity, and it's important that we say that. Different bands have different identities. Some groups are going to come off as very cerebral and very artistic. Some groups might come off as kind of aggressive and gutsy, and those are important. That's who they are in their community. That's how they exist. All these performers are worthy of our recognition and dignity for their efforts. Anything else on that?
No, it's great. I'm very proud, especially as we put this vehicle together with the guidance of Dr. Kent, and I like that we now have a vehicle that's as progressive as the groups are in the state of Texas, but also it didn't leave anyone in the past. We just opened up the net a lot further, so we can definitely have opportunities to evaluate groups that are whether it be a certain style and a certain way of doing things, and the ones that are again trying to push innovation. I think that we're right there with them. It's been great to see.
So moving on to the next slide, when we begin to balance the what and the how, the intent of the bullet points on the front of the sheet, so you can see here we're kind of turning the corner into the sheets. The intent on the front is to provide an overview, and then that continues on the back with several guiding questions. So we should be referring to and reflecting on the questions as often as possible. One or more of the bullet points might start to stand out. Again, if I'm judging visual, we might see great individual marching, but the set-to-set clarity, the group, the ensemble marching is just not there. And so that bullet point may start to stand out. Inside of that bullet point, control of form might really start to be a laser focus for us. That's okay. We just do need to make sure that we stay balanced throughout. And again, that balance of what is being asked of the performers. Is it right on level for 3A finalists, area finalists? Is it a little bit under that level, but they're achieving it really high? Is it a little bit above that level, but they're not quite achieving it? And that seesaw is really where we're going to spend a lot of our time as area judges.
Yeah, in my evaluations, I love the back of the sheet. In fact, a lot of times I have turned to that first, because it's asking these great questions, which you should be doing in your own mind as over the course of time as you're judging. It's asking you to what degree the performance demonstrate, and of course it has those same bullet points. And as he said, you will find certain things will start popping off the page. There'll be this theme that keeps coming up, and you're going, okay, that's a difference maker with that group, whichever way it is, positively or something maybe as the difference is not as strong as another group. But you'll start seeing those more and more as you look at the back of the sheet and then maybe back to the front of the sheet.
Absolutely. The intent of the bullet points on the front provides that overview, right? And so just making sure that we kind of, I'm on Mark's page. I live on the back of the sheet. The overview is fine, but the questions and the answers to those questions help. And so let's talk about, we said recognize, measure, reward. Let's go on to that next slide and talk about impression, analysis, and comparison. There's a macro and a micro to this for me as a judge. My impression starts before the group comes on the field. Now, I'm not saying I'm judging, but I am saying I see pirate ships rolling into the end zone, and I see the color guard dressed as pirates, and I see the flag, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be a pirate show. We're probably going to hear music in 6/8. We're probably going to hear, we kind of know where this is going. I might get other impressions. I might notice that they only have one tuba player. I might notice that they only have 2 bass drums, or that they have a stationary battery, or like whatever that might be, the choices they make. Again, I'm not judging it. I'm just going, okay, this is a choice that this group has made. Is this choice to their advantage? I would think yes. And then you see I spend the middle inside of analysis mode. I'm really deep in with that group. As I get to that last minute or so, that clock is winding down in the end zone. By comparison, I'm comparing them not only to the groups of the day, but to that historical standard. Now, I have a micro version of that too, which is small impression of a brass feature, analysis as we get. I see it setting up. I see all the brass semicircles on, right on the 50-yard line. Okay, this is going to be a brass feature. I analyze it as it goes on, and then as it wraps up, I offer a comparative kind of analysis on my end of this was really good, continue to work for dynamic contrast inside of that, continue to work for articulation clarity. Is this a similar system you use, that impression analysis comparison cycle?
It is. I can think of specifically, I think it was at the 2A contest that I judged, and you talk about an impression, again, the ensemble, it was, I think, a smaller number of low brass players. And you're just thinking, okay, this is going to be interesting. And lo and behold, I loved how the group sounded. You could tell that they said, this weakness is going to be our strength. We're going to strategically develop the show in a specific way. We're going to maybe add with accentuation with an electronic sound. But it was where they filled the void with other musicians, and were very crafty how they did it. And so that impression, I just went, wow, your stock has risen a lot with me, not overreacting, me going, you've really come up with so many creative solutions. Now I'm going to analyze what you've done towards that. So I love both sides of it.
Yeah, and I think that cycle, it feels like I'm on a wheel the whole time I'm judging. Is like I'm aiming to just get an impression of the moment, quick analysis, on with that comparison piece. Let's go on to the next slide. So the rating piece, and I want you to think about this as a flow through. The rating piece is done at the region round. The group was understood by what established paradigms we have for what a 2A first division looks like. Then we use those current sheets to help kind of formulate and the philosophy of those sheets. We go through that impression analysis comparison cycle. We begin at area, though, to introduce the 5 boxes. Okay, and so we're going to talk a lot here about the 5 boxes before we get to a specific sheet, because every sheet has these 5 boxes. They're called rarely, sometimes, usually, consistently, and always. Or you might hear us refer to box 5 as always, right? At the highest level, box 5, box 1, rarely. It's essential that at area and at state that we have uniform numerical treatment over the course of the day, right? Our scale, these 5 categories, and notice that each of these 5 categories is divided into thirds. So we could say, oh man, it's consistently bordering on always. It's right. So now you kind of see where I am on that. Or it's usually, and man, it's real close to consistent, but it's not quite there for me. That delineated scale really helps us kind of sort the groups into almost these 15 categories. Now, as we said earlier, you're not going to use a lot of rarely. Notice how small that box is. You're also at area not going to use a lot of always. You may see 1 or 2, but where are you going to spend the bulk of your time? The biggest boxes, usually and consistently, and you're going to have some sometimes.
That's where more the points are to work with. If this is a newer concept to you, a layman's term that it could relate it to, where always would be an A on the test, and of course a B, C, and D. And if you're talking about they're in the top box of consistently, almost always, that's the B plus group. They are so close. They're doing so many things, but maybe they're just not quite over the hump yet, where all groups, all parts of the cylinders are hitting to get them in that A category. So if that's a little overwhelming, just try to put it into something I know that you're familiar with, and then that's the language how it would transfer.
Yeah, absolutely. Going on to the next slide. Proper application requires a significant understanding of this. And this is where Mark was talking about the placemat on the back, where it asks the question, to what degree do the performers demonstrate? We could pick articulation, for instance, right? If they're demonstrating an aligned approach to articulation, is that happening consistently? Yeah, very consistently, again, B plus, B minus. Very consistently, just consistently, kind of, but almost on that usually line. So the words we attach will guide us. And so essentially, when we're going through and talking to that group, we're taking that descriptor, we're matching that descriptor to the placemat, and we're kind of creating this XY chart, almost like a scatter plot, right? We're just putting little dots on this number line, and we're going in question number 1, I have them consistently. Question number 2 is usually. Question number 3 is very consistently, to begin to arrive at a score there inside of that. So anything else before we dive into sheets? We're going to do one more quick philosophy circle back.
No, let's keep moving. Yep.
Yeah. So finishing up on that next slide about philosophy is each caption is both rating and ranking. By rating, I don't necessarily mean first division, second division, though you can use those terms. They are the same terms on the region sheet. As I mentioned, always isn't on the region sheet, and there's a fifth division on the region sheet that doesn't make it to area, obviously. But each caption is subject to both rating and ranking. The final score should reflect the combination of all of these things. In reality, you might have 2 groups that are within a box. So within the woodwinds box, they could be tied. I would not advocate this, but if you feel like you just can't make a decision between band A on the day and band G later in the day, they have to be tied for you. That's okay. But what we cannot have is a bottom line tie. No bottom line ties. So even if you chose to do that, and with the way that the new recap works, and again, in the second half of today's broadcast, we'll talk a little bit about the recaps and how they look, they're going to see that you tied their woodwinds with school G if you're at school A. So as a band director, I would rather you make the call, even if it's just 1 point out of the 300 points available to you. If you just did a 1 point thing, at least said, I think this was a little better today based on today's performance. These decisions, I think, are really critical to a well-run contest, to you really helping that group to grow.
Let's be specific, like the music sheet. When I get to some of those critical decisions, you have to have certain benchmarks in your mind, like maybe tone quality. I'm going to reflect on those 2 groups. I use tone quality to really compare. This group really just came across a little bit more resonant, a little more clear, and that would maybe break the tie in my mind. You can use whatever you want, but I would think anything that you can say, this is the one I'm always going to go to in case those close calls have to make it, and you have that to live with it.
Yeah. So before we go to this next slide, I'm going to tell you that our first quiz is up. So I'm going to switch to this slide. Now, Jerry, how do I take the quiz? Okay. Number 1, if you're like me, we've all been to restaurants in the last few years and gotten used to QR codes. So if you're watching this not on your phone, you can always just get out your phone and take the quiz. You're going to choose your name from the drop-down. Every area judge's name has been populated. If for some reason you can't find it, the very bottom choice is I can't find my name, and then you can type it in the box below. I will tell you this first quiz is the longest of all the quizzes you take today, and it's going to go over philosophy. It's going to go over some of the before, during, and after things that we talked about, and it's going to talk a little bit about the 5 boxes before we dive in. So again, we're right at an hour into the training, and it's time for this first quiz. The other way you can take it, if you're like, I'm on a laptop or I'm on my phone, you can go into that comments and click on important links, and you will see quiz number 1 right there. So with that, I'm going to set a 2-minute timer and let you do this. If you just don't want to mess with the quizzes right now and you want to wait till the end to take all your quizzes, that's okay with us too. You don't have to take them now if you need a potty break, if you need to go deal with something else for a second. But again, we're going to take a 2-minute break. Ben's going to go ahead and put up that slide for you now for quiz number 1, and you can go ahead and start on it. We'll be back with you in 2 minutes. Can you unpicture and picture us? Thanks. Are you doing picture in picture? Yeah. Okay. Can you throw me my
Sure,
water?
I am now.
It's in my backpack. You have water?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the timing's going well, right?
Yeah. No, I think we're. I mean, this is about the halfway point on the slides. Do you want me to print a copy of them so that you're not having to look at the screen, or is that okay?
We're fine.
Okay. They're not good? Then throw them away. I don't want them.
Are they stale? Is it?
No, they taste like
It's like socks.
We have 105 people. Oh, Ben, Dr. Kent says, can you turn our mics down? Or maybe he means our mics are still on. Hi, Dr. Kent.
I pressed the mute button. The right mute button.
We're coming off of headphones, so you may want to turn the red knob all the way down. The red knob on the headphones. All right. Test 1, 2. Welcome back. Excited to be here. Thank you all for your patience. Hopefully everything went well with quiz number 1. You can always go back and retake that if you need to. Again, those links will stay there. So if you want to go back and review anything of today, the whole slide deck, all that is there. It is time to move forward by talking with this next slide is going to be all about area. I always mention in this time, and I know we have a lot of 1A through 4A directors joining us. I know we don't have a 1A area round, but a lot of 1A through 4A directors are joining us as judges. This is also focusing on the state round for 1A through 4A, and we use part of this presentation with those state judges. Let's go on to the area music one, and if you'll go into, Ben, the slide that has both the front and back of the sheet for everybody to see. So we, what year are we on now of these sheets? Is this year 3 or 4? 2021 we used them for the first time.
Post-COVID, yes.
Yeah, I think we were scheduled to launch the sheets in 2020 and postpone that into now. So anyway, with that, this is third year of the sheet, so chances are all of your groups have been adjudicated on these sheets at this point, and you're very familiar with it. And again, we're going to dive into the music sheet specifically. Let's go on to the next slide. The first thing as we zoom in is ensemble performance. Just to read through these, and then we'll talk, and we have some directors who have joined us for some videos here with some presentations, but we're going to talk about phrasing and artistic expression, blend and balance, precision and timing, dynamic contrast, style and articulation, and effective use. I want, since Mark's talked about the placemat a couple times on the back, maybe talk us through a scenario where you would use the placemat in this ensemble music area.
Sure. And leading to this, if you refer to the region sheet, if you're a director towards this, think about how broad the scope was. Everything did kind of resemble ensemble music, and it had a couple of little descriptors. It did talk about the woodwind as a bullet point, brass as a bullet point, etc. Now we have specifics where those certain sections are getting evaluated. Sampling is going to be real important, so we kind of talked about the how to judge. It's your job to find ways to focus efforts and be able to say, I'm going to evaluate woodwinds in this moment. Sometimes the directors and the designers bring that to you. They make it obvious where here's the obligatory woodwind feature or something. Sometimes they don't, so they put it in the ensemble. But your job is to be able to evaluate each of these ideas. Percussion performance is real important because we're not only evaluating, we think about that primarily as the battery percussion. Think about the contribution that the front ensemble made. So even within that, there's musicians on the field that are actually helping with this. The points are taken care of by your for you. We at the bottom of this sheet, if you happen to be referring to it, the content, you can see that there's 150 points compared to the other ones, but it does have some importance, and that becomes now the challenge to the performer that they're being offered in addition to the excellence that kind of helps them out. I had this there. Looking at things, if I'm looking at the group, maybe I'll put my finger on like the brass performance, and I just kind of have it there while I'm watching the ensemble, and then I'm listening to a moment, and then I'm referring down to it, maybe making my comments, but I'm able to talk about, hey, the technical ideas in that area were above average as they were featured through the course of time, and then you're trying to recollect how many times did I refer to that, especially in regards to excellence.
Absolutely. And as we move on to, and I'm going to kind of fast forward through this, if you'll go on to the next slide, the woodwind performance and the brass performance box, and really the percussion one, but with a couple of changes, are very similar. So I know, too, if it's your first time out, you're like, Mark just went over that. You're like, oh my gosh, this is so much to think about inside of it. But to his point, you're going to kind of mark one with your hand or maybe a pencil dash,
yeah.
and just know like, okay, I'm holding on to that one because I'm going to come back to it, those kind of things. The woodwind box really just focuses on 4 things: tone quality and intonation, which I would argue are hand-in-hand conversations, technique and accuracy, and blend and balance. And then as you look at the brass one on the next slide, identical. Like, you don't have to think about anything. It's the same. And then even as you look into the percussion one, admittedly, we used to talk about percussion intonation, timpani, I guess. But quality, precision and timing, technique and accuracy, blend and balance. And so, again, it's my hope that from the music kind of through the ensemble and into the 3 captions of woodwind, brass, percussion, that you're able to bop through those seamlessly. Because there are going to be times where it's a percussion and brass thing. There are going to be times where it's a front ensemble and a woodwind thing. So being able to have that wide range of thoughts inside of that hopefully is easy by descriptors that are closely aligned or are neighbors of one another. Now, I'm not going to get into the content conversation yet, so I'm just going to table content until we do these top boxes of the music and the visual, and then we're going to do a whole unit on content, because I think if there's anything, and Mark chaired the committee that really started these sheets, that maybe gave folks the most pause as this was rolling out was, well, content's now its own box, its own thing. So
Yes.
we're going to focus on that deeply, because I think as judges too, it's maybe the area where you're like Jerry, I could talk to woodwinds all day, I could talk to percussion all day,
Right.
but content is maybe the area. So we're going to kind of save that one to really dive into. So let me tell you what we did this year. Many of you received these emails from me and said, would you file a video with me and tell me a little bit about your thoughts inside of any of these 7 or so questions that I gave you. Some related to ensemble, woodwind, brass, percussion, some of them related to content. And so we have a number of submissions. This first one comes from Mr. Jeff Jones at Marcus High School. Jeff's going to talk specifically about music, but ensemble and content, and just kind of maybe a real high-level thought about it, but also a little bit of nitty-gritty that's great. So let's go ahead and play this first video for you.
You know, as I think back about the commentary we've received over the years that's been the most valuable to us with regards to challenging us to be a better version of ourselves, and also the best representation of what we were trying to create, are the times when evaluators have taken the opportunity to acknowledge the level of exposure or the level of risk, if you will, that students are taking. You know, does the show that they're performing in not only create a visceral response from the audience, but does it create a level of intellectual intrigue that's going to keep a student engaged from August till November? You know, are there multiple responsibilities for them where they have to challenge themselves to be aware and engaged in timing at an incredibly high level? Is there rubato? Is there a cello rondo? Is there an opportunity for them to express themselves? Or is everything scripted down to a T? And when an ensemble takes that opportunity to play music from different styles or with different exposure points, I think that that's something that really should be discussed and can be valued. When there's an opportunity to acknowledge on the tape the level of challenge of just a wind release with no suspended cymbal, no electronic, no percussive backing to it, or the level of clarity in an intense percussive moment that isn't, you know, covered up by something else in the ensemble. So that opportunity to recognize and respect the level of challenge that the student has put themselves through, not just physically or emotionally, but intellectually as well, is something we appreciate and value. And then what is the, you know, what I would call simultaneous demand placed on the performer? Are all of their high level, high intensity, high challenge things happening while standing still, or relegated to a small group of performers? Or is it something that everybody's asked to participate in and they have other visual responsibilities to go along with their incredibly challenging musical responsibilities? In addition to that, what's the level of coordination? Is the drill design complementary and setting your eye up to see and hear what we want you to hear? Does the color guard do a great job of systematically drawing your attention to certain places or becoming a visual representation of what you're hearing musically? And when evaluators take the opportunity to acknowledge that, to discuss that, to talk to us about ways to refine and challenge ourselves to a higher level on that, that's certainly something that we've really appreciated over the years and have been very thankful for as we look back and reflect on our times performing together.
So what I like most about what Jeff shares with us are not only his thoughts about yes, we're going to go out there. They're going to be woodwinds, they're going to be brass, they're going to be percussion, but the seamless integration of those and the risk taking. And I think it's one of the smartest things that he really points out well on this is that seamless integration of all of those elements and coming together, and we're able to do some rubato and we're able to stretch some things out musically. And I think as a judge, when we're listening through, we can get caught up in the weeds of woodwind tone quality, brass precision, percussion balance. But are we able to take a step back and appreciate what went into making that product what it needs to be, and just kind of understanding that?
I love the thoughtfulness of what Jeff said. You can tell that was very well thought out. Not only did they say, here's the source material we're going to use, but what's the treatment? These are some moments, whether it be a checklist, a compulsory, or they just things that they hold with value, which they do as really well as a performing ensemble. I love the challenge as an adjudicator is to be able to recognize that, and as they're creating that moment, you address it. Boy, I see there that you really created where the percussion stopped 4 counts soon, and you intentionally made that a wind release where you could really hear that chord ring in the dome or in this particular stadium. And then to what degree did they do it where you could address it? I think that's reaffirmation on their part. Hey, this person really gets it. And it's a challenge, but I love that challenge that all of us can accept.
Yeah. Yeah, and so as you're going to see over these next few, we're going to continue with a few more clips from various classifications. Again, we focus pretty heavy 2A, 4A, 6A this year because that's who just went, and I promise I'm going to flip the focus to 1A, 3A, 5A next year. But so you're going to hear from some others. So our next person to weigh in is Zach Sims. Zach is at Shiner High School, great 2A program here in our state. So let's hear a little bit of what Zach has to share as well, just talking about the music side of things.
Through the lens of a small school director, I feel like in the past 5 to 10 years, small school programs have definitely changed the expectation of what it means to be a really effective program, how to march an effective show. And so I think a lot of times it's very easy for judges to comment on, like, I really liked how you tied all of your elements together for large schools, just because it's easier to recognize. But I also want that to be implemented for small schools. So coordination and effective use of all performing elements. I would love for judges to talk about how music and drill go together, and if there's any general effect or visuals, that really is something that we're talking about as well. And I also feel like in the past 5 years, I definitely think there are some more smaller schools that are pushing the boundaries, pushing the envelope. So in regards to like content with respect to challenge, even though it's going to be something that is different, a 1A program is going to have a different show compared to a 6A program, I still think a lot of the same verbiage and a lot of the same comments should be made for those programs, even whenever the shows are vastly different. A 1A program's show will look very different than a 6A program. However, I want judges to still use a lot of the same verbiage, a lot of the same material, so that our students are able to see reward for pushing the boundary, for pushing themselves to learn harder material. Those are things that I hope that judges would use in the future.
So in Zach's comments, what I love from a 2A director and a very acclaimed 2A program that Zach leads are his thoughts, again, almost really seamlessly tied with what Jeff shared from his 6A perspective, is that seamless coordination of elements. But the other kind of layer he added in top for 2A especially is content with respect to challenge, right? In a 2A program where you absolutely know the capabilities of every single child and you can custom tailor exactly what's being asked of them musically and visually, that coordinated effect becomes a really special thing. That coordinated effect becomes something that is incredible for us to appreciate as a music judge, is that you tie together, you don't have 24 clarinets at your disposal often. You're dealing with single-digit numbers in a lot of sections. And so that coordination is something that we have to invest in, and I think as adjudicators, we have to notice at a high level. Again, the sheet is siloed, right? The sheet has a woodwind box, a brass box, a percussion box, and one of the kind of ongoing threads you're going to hear directors talk about in their response is they want to hear where the boxes blend and where the percussion and the brass are coming together in these meaningful moments, where the high brass and the low brass are placed together in some meaningful ways. So what else about Zach's kind of comments would you like to reflect on?
And I love especially the embracing and really pushing the envelope with that classification. We all know the challenges that are each level. Again, you mentioned the numbers. It could be an age where there's some really, really young students that are out there given a lot of responsibility, maybe a first-year marcher. But in all instances, excellence is excellence. And I think especially with that, it's great to be able to hear us be able to address that. I appreciate the challenges that he's choosing to put in front of the students, and you can tell it's going to be really, really thorough when they're getting to that point. And the students will definitely, when they hear it, they go, yay, they get it. And sometimes that group will have kind of an it factor, and you don't know what it is. Like you kind of go, there's something about this group. It's kind of it. And then when you kind of hear that, then while they're performing or at the recap of it, refer back to your sheet, and I bet you'll be able to see something that'll pop off the page and go, okay, that was it. That's what's been different so far in this contest, or this is the one that really connected with me more, and it puts it more in a specific language.
Absolutely. And so, I think that judging of 2A and 4A and 6A, 3A and 5A, they're getting closer and closer together
Yes, they
for
are.
the way that they coordinate shows. And I think as a judge, I hope they're pushing on us, to find those coordination levels, to find those, it's almost like a recipe. What flavor did you add to here that made that it factor, that group unique? And that flavor was you just have this outstanding clarinet player that you featured in these ways that were really meaningful, and they paired with different groups and created these different colors. And so kind of finding those avenues is I think the thing that we're seeing more and more of in that 2A class and that 3A class. Let's go over to another 2A director. This is going to be John Bratton at Panhandle High School. And John's going to share a little bit with us about kind of music ensemble and some thoughts on the music ensemble box in general.
In regard to balance and blend, I'll say that we were one of the smaller 2A schools last year. We marched one flute player, and you could hear her on the field. You couldn't hear her all at the time, but we could hear her and our woodwinds. And so I would, it's nice to get credit for that. And they might not be featured a bunch. There just weren't very many of them, but they contributed. And so it's nice to be recognized for that. Secondly, for dynamic contrast, how is that achieved? Is it achieved by the band turning around and facing backfield? We worked really hard to create different dynamic levels in our show. And so it's nice to be rewarded for that, that we crescendoed and decrescendoed, and we took you along that with us. It wasn't just all achieved by turning around. And so it's nice to be rewarded for doing something musical. We used a synthesizer. This is electronics. It was used as a melodic instrument, but at times we used it where it had a midline or a bass line part, but we didn't use it to cover up sections that weren't good. We still expected a lot out of our tubas and trombones. So it's easy to achieve a full sound with the synthesizer. It's harder to achieve that acoustically. So just remember that you can keep that in mind, and it's cool to have a synth, but reward us for what we're doing musically with the band. We also mic'd a flute soloist this last year, and we had several comments that the judges wished that there was a different sound. We were using our Megavox to mic the flute player, and that's all we had. I earnestly wish that we had more and better equipment, but just keep that in mind as you're watching us, that different schools have different resources. So thank you guys for judging, and I hope you're all having a great fall.
So I thought John's comments were some of the more insightful in terms of thinking about the picture of what happens before they even got to area, which is, what are the challenges? Well, he only had one flute player. This is a group that advanced to state finals,
Yes.
So when you think inside of that, clearly he's creatively using those performers. He maybe didn't have the resourcing to have big elaborate sound systems and all of these things. taking the resources that he has and trying to maximize those and create those special moments, I think often adds to the mystique of, you know, that group that stands out to you, that you're just like, wow, you know, I realized I only have one. I watched them marching in. I noticed there's only one flute, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to get to hear this child. That's a shame. She's probably playing well, but
Right.
then you get into the show and you're like, you know what? I could hear her in every single woodwind moment.
Right.
That to me is maybe more impressive than the 24-member flute section that's well balanced in there.
Right.
Is that you're able to achieve that.
Yeah, the different scenarios we all deal with, as he mentioned, it does have challenges. The things sometimes we get a little bit take for granted. Oh, it's the synthesizer, and we've got somebody on staff that handles that. And probably in his situation, no. I mean, the band director, as we've talked before, is everything. They are the own captions all the way across, and what their knowledge of it is, or what they can find on YouTube videos. Sometimes that's the area they have, and I love seeing that they've tried to maximize it. You're right. We don't want it to be where the student's performing to their level. Try to read through it a little bit, even though like the mega box sound maybe doesn't have quite the fidelity you're looking for. Give that student as much credit as possible. Definitely talk about their performance more than, hey, the crackling of that was kind of not up to par. But try to, again, that's a great educational moment that you can bring that up. And I applaud those directors and students to be able to do that.
Well, and I'm so glad that you said, like, focus on the students and their efforts. Things will go wrong electronically. Things will go. I mean, that is a given. Yeah, it's live by the cord, die by the cord, as we might say. Like, things are going to go wrong electronically, but the fact that we're able to see the efforts of the students through that, and we're able to listen through that, and it's not, you know, something that is we spend the next 3 minutes talking about.
Right.
But is something that we reflect on. Hey guys, I can tell the flute microphone didn't work the way that you intended it to today. Moving on. You know, it doesn't have a bearing on your score that something didn't get plugged in correctly. It is my hope that you can still hear that performer. You understand the spirit in which it's designed, and can kind of work there. We're going to pivot back over to Class 6A. Mr. Mobley from Round Rock High School, a little bit of Austin checking in on a discussion of music and just kind of how he thinks about music adjudication and the design of the music box.
I think when we look at the content box, we start by looking at what is being asked of the students. Is what is being asked, both visually and musical, suitable for that group of performers? And you kind of have to look at the big picture, and you have to also look at individual sections within the ensemble and see what they're doing in terms of the suitability of the material being asked. Next, I think you have to ask yourself, is the music being supported by the visual, and is the visual being supported by the music? I think that's a great question to ask, and as you watch the performance, you can kind of ask yourself that over and over again throughout the performance, and it's a pretty clear answer. Generally, yes it is, or no it isn't, and then maybe how it could be better. Finally, are all of the elements of the ensemble working together to contribute from moment to moment? And obviously, we have a soloist, or we have a small ensemble, or we have a section thing over here. But in general, are the elements of the ensemble joining together in a way that can create content that makes great sense? And there's not a reliance on any one part of the ensemble for the bulk of the show to propel things along, or are all of the portions of the ensemble kind of contributing in an equal kind of a way to the program? So those are the three questions. Suitability of the performance. Does the music and the visual support one another, and are the elements helping one another out to create moment to moment? Thanks very much. Bye.
Yeah, and so David dives into, I think, a really valuable point, which is how do they link together? And we're going to talk about that a lot in content, but I think oftentimes when people say, you know, what are we looking for in content where it says, does the music support the visual, does visual support the music? And that's one of the things that stood out to me in his recording, was just talking about the marriage of those two elements, but also the involvement piece. And I'm going to kick this to you because I know that involvement is something that's really valuable to you as an adjudicator. Is what does that involvement look like? And so how do you as a judge kind of take apart in music the involvement piece, a soloist, a small ensemble, the full woodwind, you know, ensemble?
Sure. The word that comes to mind would be intent. You know, are you intending for us to look over here while this person's performing? How did you support it? How did you clear the area around it? There was you want the audience to be able to stay engaged. Never do you want an audience member to be able to say, well, I'm going to start looking at my watch now, where all of a sudden you lose them. You want to keep them captivated. And sometimes that's tricky to do because you know the show inside and out and you are engaged with it. But what does the first time viewer and also listener get? So it's being able to keep everything afloat. Someone explained that the way you put a show together, use the comparison of a movie, and the soundtrack has to match what I see on the screen. Sometimes it's an incredible movie, but we all know if John Williams doesn't all of a sudden have this dramatic moment there, a lot of times that's what creates that moment, or vice versa. A great soundtrack that's dynamic, and then the movie itself just isn't quite linked together, and it's not quite as dynamic visually. So being able to constantly marry those two ideas together, in the bullet points that are listed there, you can definitely see those. I would constantly be referring to that one in the idea stage, but then as especially is the excellence leading up to the area marching contest and that group that's putting it together, is evaluating, you should be referring to that where you can quickly recall those and you're able to kind of think through those along the way, the ones that stood out to you.
Yeah, well said. Next up is Eric Rath. Eric is at Canyon High School. We've heard from Class 2A and Class 6A. Now we're going to have a little Class 4A chime in. Let's check out what Eric Rath has to share about music, and not only what's asked of the performers, but the role that challenge plays in that.
Similarly, when it comes to the design of our shows, in terms of general effect and kind of the holistic product of what's being seen, how well are we doing what we set out to do? Like any good movie, even if it's a movie that doesn't necessarily speak to you, I'm not a big fan of a lot of different genres, but I can appreciate when they're done really, really well. It would just be my desire, for judges who are looking at the overall product of design and content to keep in mind that we are designing for our kids in a way that we are trying to maximize their strengths, build up their weaknesses, and also doing something that is content-wise relevant and on the cutting edge to the degree that we can possibly do it. And that we want to not only be seen for being successful for what we're doing, but also in terms of the design sophistication and how that relates to other bands. So in a way, I'm trying to say, if we are doing something more thoughtful, more memorable, more sophisticated, should that rank higher than a band that is also performing very well, but there's not as much on the content level? And my assumption is always, yes, two fabulous bands next to each other, but one is doing a lot more in terms of like bringing the choreo component, bringing more thought to the electronics palette, thinking more about pacing and not only what is seen on the field and the reference between doing, legitimate playing and marching at the same time versus when we're doing more modern dance-oriented fluttering and scattering and jazz running. The variety there is something that I don't want to get lost in a judge's mind because we either do it so well or because it is just often overlooked in the course of judging a lot of bands, one right after another. So that would be another consideration, is to really see what we're doing. And if we're doing something extremely well, sometimes it can make the content not appear to be as dense or as sophisticated, but actually feel like that should be rewarded better because we are pulling things off in a way that is seamless and we make it look easy. So just a consideration for anybody who finds themselves judging that particular content area. All right, thanks.
So inside of Eric's comments, I especially like his attention to detail about how the music and visual are related. And we talk about that. If you've ever done the TMAA region training, we talk about nothing exists in isolation, right? That what's asked of those woodwinds musically is challenging. What is going on visually, whether they're marching drill, whether they're doing choreography, whether they're just standing still, will also impact what we expect. And when it comes time to actually assign scores to them, Certainly the visual score doesn't necessarily factor in per se to that woodwind box, but it does definitely influence you from a challenge perspective and what's being asked of those performers and how well they were able to perform and achieve those moments.
One area that really hopefully is thought-provoking, let's say it's a group that's doing this at a high level and they make it look really, really easy. Try not to be lulled into that, going, wow, they're turning somersaults while they're playing this and they're handling it so well. Being able to credit that, like what it took for them to make it look effortless, to make it sound effortless, sometimes we kind of go, oh, it's really good, and realizing, wow, that's extremely hard what we just asked them to do. And as an adjudicator, try not to get caught up into the moment and going, okay, I'm still evaluating, like that's what they did, and the level of it was out the roof. So noticing that, it's with the top group, she'll definitely see it and definitely credit it and give it the praise that it needs.
Yeah. So percussion's going to be the next few videos. Without a doubt, when adjudicators are new to area, one of the things that they'll sometimes express to me is, Jerry, I feel fine, woodwind brass all day, but marching percussion is ever evolving, and it is moving at a fast pace. Yes. How do I make meaningful commentary to the programs? And so we're fortunate that Greg White and Ray Ulibarri at Ronald Reagan High School down in San Antonio, a 6A program, weighed in on percussion and kind of how percussion is designed in the modern day, and what we should. The prompt always for all of these was, what can area adjudicators do to help you grow your program? What do you hope that they're going to comment on? So let's see this video from the folks at Ronald Reagan.
The key thing here is all the elements, not just recognizing the content within the percussion choirs themselves, but the relationship to the winds. 90% of the time, we're supposed to be the support and the accompaniment. So just making sure we're looking through that lens holistically to sample everything in regards to the entire ensemble.
Right, and so the idea that we want to be crediting our percussion students for their performance in accompanimental roles as well, whether that's accompanying a woodwind choir or a soloist, whether that's in a brass feature or a full 2D ensemble moment, making sure that our sampling of our performers isn't only coming in those moments where there is a percussion heavy moment, or there's a percussion, whether it's a transition, or we bring the battery down and we have a moment where they're playing a feature, but considering how the book has been written and the performance and the achievement of that book happens in relationship to the wins, because we're going to have moments where we feature all of the groups and all of our performers. These sheets are designed to adjudicate all of the performers, but we also want to make sure that we are considering that coordination of all musical elements, and making sure that we're crediting those accompanimental moments in the same ways that we would a feature moment.
There's some creative aspect going into the thought process of having thin textures, so I think that's important as well. The challenge being to sample all of it, to make sure all choirs, the electronic, the percussion, the wind, the woodwind, all the choirs are being sampled within that lens.
Greg had said this, talking about the through composed, or the idea of all of the musical elements, and that is basically a through composed score. Think about it compared to a concert band composition. We would hope that the percussion book makes a lot of sense with this, and sometimes it is written by a separate person, sometimes it's bought from with something that's been coordinated. The moments should be compatible together. The usages of when the full battery plays, that's one thing I always try to notice, and I'm a brass player. I try to notice is, are they overdoing that all the time? Would this be just as effective right here where the bass drums didn't play this moment with the upper woodwinds playing this, and you can hear this really neat texture of the writing of the tenors and then to what level they're doing that. Then that way when we bring everyone in, we would do this with the full ensemble, the brass would come in, potentially it's going to be louder. When we bring in the bass drums, it's potentially going to be louder. So it's really addition through subtraction. Sometimes I look to that, and it could be where we can't do that because it kind of exposes some different areas, but again, crediting the groups that are able to make that happen. One thing they really didn't hint on quite as much too is with the front ensemble. Try to evaluate, and it's the writing of the book with the execution, but it kind of goes into the content, the music part. Does the front ensemble book just parallel what the woodwinds do most of the time. I prefer not, if you could even say in any level of an ensemble, can they create a unique color that we haven't heard before? It's a different color in the palette. It's where the winds are sustaining a note, and the front ensemble can create an arpeggiated line, spelling out the chord while we're underneath that to some skills that maybe wouldn't be quite as accessible on a wind part. How are they using that in compatibility? So not only is it colors, but I guess it's the active or lack of activity sometimes that really helps out.
Yeah, it's wonderful. We're going to hear a little more on percussion. We're going to go back to Eric Rath because Eric kind of sent me a couple of videos, and I thought they were both really good. This next one talks just about percussion from Eric's perspective as a 4A director. Let's hear that one.
Percussion specifically, a lot of times the comments we receive at UIL contests are related to our percussion section almost entirely about balance with the rest of the band. Trust me when I say that balance with the rest of the band is ground zero for us. Nothing that we play or do can be rewarded unless the balance is appropriate for the rest of our ensemble. So it's incredibly important to us too. However, what ends up happening is sometimes a music judge uses that category or that comment as sort of a box that they check, and it gets thrown away as like, okay, I did my job as a percussion evaluator, and I mentioned that they were, in very good balance with the rest of the winds, or there were balance issues. And what I would say to a music judge going into the area round is to pay special attention to the content and the sophistication of what the percussion section is being asked to do. It is far easier for an easy percussion book to be balanced with the winds rather than one that's sophisticated. So when you hear two drum lines and they're both playing marvelously, great stuff, playing really cleanly and very well balanced to the band, but one is clearly playing more sophisticated material, in my mind at least, that should be rewarded higher than the one that's playing less sophisticated material. So I think that's something that just gets overlooked by judges sometimes. Although I know it's on the sheets, there's a lot to judge when you're concentrating on music, but that's one thing that I would say, just to have this on your brain as you go into those competitions, to keep track of the sophistication level of the percussion sections.
Yeah, and so I think that sometimes we can be guilty as adjudicators of really using the percussion box as a balance box, and it's not. It is an opportunity to talk about that level of sophistication, just like we are educating woodwind players through marching band, we're educating brass players through marching band. We could dumb down a percussion books to make sure that the balance issue never comes up, but then are those students being educated? Are their hands being made stronger? Are their ears being made stronger through the marching experience? And I think that that's really key to that continued success. We're going to jump forward to another kind of, I know we're doing a little bit of back and forth with a few folks here, but they really had similar points that were kind of taken at a couple of different angles. We're going to go back to the folks at Ronald Reagan and Greg and Ray and just like the second half of their conversation. I split these up a little bit. Here's our next video.
We also want to make sure that we're considering the environmental responsibilities of these performers, making sure that the battery to front ensemble, front to back timing, the challenges that we're putting students in their position, if those are being achieved, then we need to make sure that we're crediting those achievements, right? Obviously, whenever we're designing a show, those are choices that we as designers and directors make, and they can come with risk, but they can also come with reward. And so we want to make sure that we're crediting that reward when the achievement is present.
And we should have the ability to credit that not only in moments where the percussion are staged appropriately. We have to kind of go through that holistic lens again and take into consideration where they're at all times,
Right, and again, that has to do, again, with the coordination of all elements. These things obviously tie together, right? Making sure that those environmental challenges, the demand of movement, whether they're having to march at a large step size in the battery or they're standing still playing a million notes, we're crediting those things in the same ways when they're being achieved. So we need to make sure that we're considering those demands as well as the notes and rhythms that they're performing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, super well said by those guys. And I think now we kind of hammered home that point about just the thoughts on percussion, how folks are writing, and again, an expectation for us as adjudicators. I want to frame that. We're going to kind of start moving through these a little quicker, but frame that in the woodwind area now. I originally, when I stacked these videos, I put woodwinds up first, and then it almost made sense to put this after all those discussions, because I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like the writing for woodwinds is almost as strategic as the writing for percussion, where I think it used to be the woodwinds just kind of mimicked a lot of brass parts.
Right.
And now I feel like, especially with the advent of the 7-judge system at state for classes 4A, 5A, and 6A, that we're seeing more and more strategic writing for woodwinds, as strategic as what we've seen for percussion for years.
Very much so. As I was putting ensembles together and show design together, it was one of the more challenging parts where we had to, things where we would go to the default, it would be the full ensemble playing, or try not to have just the obligatory woodwind stop down moment, which sometimes it's neat to play, or, oh, we had a woodwind soloist, surely you gave us woodwind credit, but yet I didn't get to evaluate the other woodwind players. Groups are at the state level and at the upper level of the area, when you have a full ensemble moment, believe it or not, are designing ranges, volumes, dynamical expression to shape where you hear the woodwind players. And I love it. I give big points for that, because I'm thinking, man, they created a really healthy moment where the woodwinds get a chance to shine in a full ensemble moment, or a lot of group that are 2D scoring, and the level they did it, and if they did it at a high level with great tuning and great musical expression, the effort that took into that, I thought that was really well conceived. So it's not just them operating a silo by themselves, but it not only hits what happens in the ensemble performance, but then in conjunction with the woodwind performance descriptors.
So let's hear from Greg. I persuaded Jana Harvey at Flower Mound High School to get on the line, and the two of them got to talking about woodwinds, and I think this is some really great notes of just what we can do to help programs as judges growing forward in their efforts. Let's hear this video from Greg and from Jana.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, you know, when we are in the design process of a marching band show, I think this is something that the directors and designers and whoever is involved in these conversations, I think this is the time. Like, we're looking for opportunities, not only for the woodwinds, which is what we're talking about specifically today, but, you know, for all of your sections. I think UIL with this new system is advocating for all students on the field, of course, to be evaluated, which we think is a great thing. So looking for those opportunities to expose that, you know, those woodwind moments, either through technical or lyrical facility, you know, tone quality, all of those things that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, certainly. And you know, one of the things that I think is important to talk about is, you know, when we have full ensemble moments where we have an opening impact or a ballad hit or something, and we have the full brass ensemble, full percussion section playing, and the woodwinds, you know, considering how those moments are created and designed, because to me, one of the things that's important is that we consider the context of what we're hearing, right? The woodwinds in those full ensemble 2D moments in an impact are not going to be able to be sampled as well as a brass section or a battery section. The acoustics of those woodwind instruments that are omnidirectional, they're not designed to be heard at a large distance, in contrast to a brass bell front instrument. If we have a moment that's designed to have an impact, you know, that may not be a moment for us to get a great sampling of a woodwind choir, right? And so considering how the content is written, as it says in the placemat, I think is an important quality for us as judges to consider when we're making decisions in sampling.
Absolutely. And, you know, I mean, one of the points on the placemat's appropriate and characteristic tone quality, which I think plays into that. You know, can you get your clarinets through, you know, a full 2D impact moment? Probably. If I throw them all up in the altissimo register and tell them to make that reed vibrate, you know, I probably can get it to the top of the stadium. But is that something that somebody wants to hear? Is that something, as the woodwind pedagogue on my staff, is that something that I should be teaching students?
Certainly, I agree. I will say, you know, for me, you know, I make sure that I am constantly talking to my students about what their role is in a given moment. Is their role to be heard, to play with power? Is their role to support and add color and overtone and you know, depth to a sound? And in those moments, it may be something that is much, much more difficult to sample in one of those 2D ensemble moments, rather than, like, let's talk about, you know, that appropriate characteristic tone quality in a moment where we have kind of thinned the texture out. We don't have the full brass ensemble playing. We have an opportunity for a woodwind moment where it's a great time to sample the woodwind choir.
And I think also in both of those, you know, the woodwind choir can also be sampled from a technique. I think we all know, like, of course, we're going to, park them over there and they're going to play a million notes, and we're all in the, we've all seen all of that happen in the design process. But also that moment, are they ever is the woodwind choir stage where they could play a beautiful moment, a lyrical moment? Is the brass backfield? Is it just the with a woodwind choir accompanying a soloist? Are they woodwind ensemble and front ensemble moment? Some beautiful colors can happen between those two groups. So not only the virtuosic technique, but virtuosic lyrical playing as well, which I think this dynamic contrast and just depth of color.
Awesome. So as I've said, I love the collaboration with all of these 2A, 4A, and 6A directors. Our last collaboration there between the Reagan and Flower Mound staffs to offer just a little bit of thought as to how we as judges can help grow their programs. Well, this is kind of where we wrap up the music portion, and I want to dive into quiz number 2 with you. And so if you'll go ahead, Ben, and put up quiz number 2 on the screen for everybody. As I mentioned, you can take this by using the QR code, or you can take this on a separate screen. I'm going to start my timer, and we'll be back with you in just about a minute or two. All right, we are back. Hopefully you did well on quiz number 2. Again, you can always come back and take these quizzes later. If you want to take it again, you're more than welcome to do that. We're going to dive into visual next, and so let's go ahead and look at the front and the back of the sheet. Where the music sheet has 5 boxes, the visual sheet has 3 boxes, and it's really focusing on individual movement, ensemble movement, and then the content. And again, we're going to save content for kind of the end of the conversation. On the individual movement front, just to kind of talk you through, we're thinking about control of form and interval. Really, we call it this like trio of control. How is the form and interval? How are you dealing with body, like in terms of just moving through the space? And how are you holding equipment, whether that equipment is a snare drum, a tenor saxophone, a trumpet, or a flag, right? How are those things helping from a visual perspective, and how does all of that tie together? Precision and timing. Does all of that work in terms of timing with the feet, timing of motion, the demonstration of that individual style? Do all the performers look the same, whether it be color guard related, whether it be marching related? Are their feet approaching the ground in the same manner? Poise, presence, communication. Does it feel like the performers are there and performing to the audience, or does it feel like their heads are down a lot? You're not seeing that connection. Or you talked about engagement earlier. You're not seeing that engagement that you'd hope for. And then recovery. We took out the word years ago from error, but just recovery. Mistakes are going to happen. Are they recovering in the same method? Or are they doing it in a way that is nearly impossible to find because it happens so seamlessly? Anything else about?
To reiterate a comment that was made at the very first part of our training, there's no required marching or movement style in the state of Texas. All of these are fair game. So again, there's choices that are made. Again, if it's something you're not familiar with, try to get it. You should be able to evaluate it to the best of your ability. But again, there's nothing that's been prescribed that something that happens to look like this is always going to be at the top. Not at all. So again, just keep an open mind. Try to be well versed in as many different styles as you can.
Yeah. On the ensemble movement, if you go to that next zoom in, we're talking about the achievement of that form and interval, the precision and timing. Again, you notice the tie-in. We're looking at it under the microscope, micro, macro, right? Micro, we're looking at individual performers, how well they do this. And then the ensemble, how well do those ideas align across the group into the ensemble movement. And so Brian Sowers at Tenaha High School, another 2A program, Class 2A did a great job of sending us some thoughts about how can the area judges greater help them grow. Here's a video from Brian talking about visual.
Well, for me as a director that would be moving on from region marching contest as a first division band, I would still want the judges at the area and state level to recognize the quality marching and the timing and interval spacing and form development. For instance, it should be extremely important at the area level that forms are clear to see, and I want to be recognized and rewarded for clear forms and equidistant spacing with intervals. That we are rewarded and recognized and measured for precise marching and precise timing. For instance, are students moving to their sets on time? Are they departing their sets on time? Arrival and departure to set is extremely important to form development, and we would like to get recognized for that. Timing in the feet is exceptionally important, and it's easy to overlook that in favor of a great story or an entertaining story or something that's more visually entertaining. It's still exceptionally important that feet are in time, and we need to be recognizing and rewarding students for the difficulty it takes to remain in step. And uniformity of style. Are our feet together if they're supposed to be? Are they together or are they apart? 45 degrees, or are they 35 degrees, 90 degrees? What angle are they spaced at? And those groups that get more precise in that area should be rewarded and recognized. Horn carriage is also exceptionally important in my opinion. The professionalism, are students standing up tall and demonstrating great pride, and are they recovering from mistakes? So to wrap up, basically I would like to see bands rewarded, measured, and recognized for their uniformity of style, form clarity, interval spacing that's equidistant, that they are uniform in what they're doing, professional, and they recover well. And not to see that overlooked in the favor of maybe a great story that a band is telling. Stories are important, especially at the area and state level, but it's not so important that we overlook our ultimate goal, which is to have great quality marching, especially as an ensemble. Thank you.
Jerry, the comments I loved, it applies to Class 1A all the way through 6A. You know, everything he's saying. So it was well said, but we were talking about from his perspective, but I love everything was applying all the way across the board. I thought of some additional things that are listed, then not just on the individual descriptors, but here's some words that I've probably written over the last couple of years as my notes. Individual style. Does it provide clarity? What they've asked them to do, does it provide clarity to the movement? Does it affect the musical performance positively or negatively? And it could be the execution. Sometimes it's the what. It could be how they're doing it, but a lot of times it's the execution and the how. Does it provide a style that all performers can execute? Sometimes it's great. It's neat to see the Pyware dots move around the field that march a perfect show every time, there. But then we get to certain dynamics. It's whether it be the step size is too large for someone, or a certain transition where they're having to do a change of direction, and it really catches everyone off guard constantly, and then into the form is being whipped around. Is it something they can really execute? But the design of that, and then of course the training that's gone into this. We want all students to look trained at all times, and then of course people coming up with solutions if it doesn't. No one knows what was on there originally. We just know what the show is being presented to us at the time.
Yeah, it's just so interesting to me that the very same thing we're talking about on the music front, with the intentionality of how you write percussion, the intentionality of how we incorporate woodwinds, is the same with the intentionality of how we choose the drill that they're marching, how they get from dot to dot, and does it complement the music or does it work against the music? Because we've all had that moment where you're like, I want this brass moment to come out, but they are doing a 6-to-5 backwards. And there's no way it's going to come out. And so, again, programs make a wide variety of choices. Our role as adjudicators is to comment, to try and help that program grow. And, hopefully they can kind of see the path forward through there. We have, again, I know we have some of our returning judges coming on. If you're coming on, thanks for being here. You can say hi to us in the chat. We're finishing up with our new judges. We probably got about 4 or 5 minutes, and we'll be able to start the returning judge thing right at 3, maybe just a minute or two after 3 o'clock. I do want to talk about color guard. If we can go forward into the slide that talks about color guard and judging considerations. Inside of judging considerations for color guard, I think we're now talking about, and we're hearing from directors, make more comments to percussion about these things. Talk to our woodwinds here. The other outcry that I think we've heard is make sure we're making comments to the color guard. Mm-hmm. Maybe you have a ton of background as a judge with color guard. That's wonderful. If you do, maybe you have a limited experience. What are things that I should look for? And so we put in the chat, a couple of color guard folks here in Texas helped us develop a little bit of a sheet, and I'm just going to tease it for you and tell you that it's in the bottom there of our links, of those links for today. But it is things like the height of the toss or the rotations, the pathway into the release, how they catch it, what is the contribution of their body while these tosses are in the air? Are they doing shoulder rolls and manipulating it with other parts of their body? On the next slide, does and kind of to your point about the drill, does the color guard work complement the music? Mm-hmm. Does it feel like when the music is forte, the color guard is forte? When the music
things are going up when it's louder.
Yeah, like does all of that make sense? Is the color guard being used to draw your focus to the woodwind feature? That, again, all of this like kind of becomes this seamless conversation about not only have we set up that woodwind moment, but have we placed color guard performers there to help draw you into that moment visually so that your ears and your eyes are all there. Is the color guard used in a way that's more than just functional? Is there evidence of training? I look at recovery a lot. I mean, it's going to be windy up in the panhandle. Sure. We're gonna battle wind. Okay, how do they recover from that when that gust of wind hits them? Are they able to recover in a professional way? So anyway, you can look through on that sheet. I'm not going to do all of them today, but there are some wonderful guiding questions provided by a number of color guard instructors here in our state to help us as area judges make more informed commentary too. And I would print that sheet. I would have it on my table that day. And hopefully that helps.
One quick thing with this, this would be where we're talking about at the beginning, how to practice watching a YouTube recording. This is the voice of experience speaking. I noticed a couple of times I was commenting going, wow, what a really, really pretty flag there. I was commenting on one decisions an adult had made in a choice of material they had bought and something that came up at the right time. It had nothing to do with the comments of the students. So I intentionally said, every time I make one of those, or even if I don't, I'm going to talk even more now about, wow, the execution of that moment is what made it more special. Your spacing being done really well. So again, use that sparingly. Again, you're just commenting about things on the field versus what the actual performers bring in the show to life. Let's talk more about what the student's contribution is rather than the adult design contribution was.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost the same with the props conversation. Yeah. Is like the prop is not going to advance you on a level. How you utilize it. If you're using it as a stage and it's featuring different elements and all of this, then sure. But just putting it out there doesn't earn you any points. Just like buying pretty flags doesn't earn you points on the visual front. Right. But how you utilize that and how those performers are able to feature that silk in a number of ways can really help elevate the performance. Lastly, we're going to just spend a few minutes here. And again, for our returning judges, if you're hopping on, you're more than welcome to to enjoy this little bit of conversation as we finish up with our new judges on the last little unit here about content. The content box was probably the newest thing that we added, and the one that maybe everybody was a little bit like, oh, does this feel new? A lot of it was sourced on those old sheets, but we kind of put it together into a more succinct form. And I'm just going to read to you and the content, some of the descriptors here. effective use of all performing elements, effective visual reinforcement of the music, or on the other side, it's effective musical reinforcement of the visual. Suitability of the content. Music, is it suitable to the performers? Frequency and demand of movement while playing appears on both the content boxes. Continuity and flow. Does the music and the flow from moment to moment, like you were talking earlier about concert band pieces, does it feel like it flows from moment to moment in ways that are enjoyable to the ear and the eye? And how about the coordination and staging? And I was just talking about, this woodwind feature moment. Is it set up in a good place? Is there color guard with it? Have we done those things to create that moment of seamlessness where the content, the decisions made by the adults, place the students in opportunities to be highly successful?
Yeah, it's probably one of the harder things from someone designing a show. We can't teleport them around the field to different places, but we can strategically say this little group is going to be featured here while we break them apart. This group is preparing for it, whether it be an equipment change, what motivated them to get to the sideline or behind a prop. Were they staying in character? Things that you really can address. It's like a musician. You wouldn't say, hey, they finally just stopped playing the phrase in the right style. It's that same correlation. If you have a stronger music background, you're looking for they're performing all the way to the end of this while they changed out of this moment. And then when they came up again, they was using the movie and the soundtrack concept. They're providing the visual impact along with this great woodwind moment.
Yeah, well said. We have one video to share about content. This comes from Mark Nichols at China Spring, a 4A program. And if we'll go ahead and roll that video. Oh, we're having trouble finding Mark's video. No worries. We'll find it, I'm sure, in just a little bit. So with that, we are going to move on to our final quiz for the new judges. So if you are a returning judge, you do not need to take this quiz unless you just want to take it for the love of the game. If you are a new judge, this is the last of your only quizzes, and then quizzes 4 and 5, all judges will take. So for my new judge friends, if you'll put up the slide for quiz number 3, we're going to go ahead and set a quick 2-minute timer, and then we'll be with all of our judges here in just a moment. All right, welcome back. Thank you all. We ran a few minutes over with our new judges, but all good. And don't worry, Mr. Nichols, I will come back and run your video a little later. It'll kind of tie into some other stuff, so Mark will help me not forget. And so welcome to all of our area judges. If we could, Ben is running our production for today. Could we go back to Dr. Kent's video that he shared for all the judges? I'd like for all the judges just to get to see his welcome that he shared. So we're going to go back and roll Dr. Kent's video from earlier. So some of you may have seen this already.
Hello, my name is Brad Kent, and I serve as the State Director of Music for the University Interscholastic League in Texas. On behalf of the over 1,000 competing marching bands in our state, I would like to thank each of you for your service as an adjudicator. One of UIL's missions, along with the Texas Music Adjudicators Association, is to provide the best possible evaluations for the marching bands in Texas. As part of this process, we have partnered with TMAA to provide annual training via webinar for our marching band adjudicators. I would like to extend special appreciation to TMAA UIL Marching Band Liaison, Jerry Miller, for his leadership in this project. We hope you find the information to be helpful and informative as you prepare for the upcoming adjudication season. Thank you.
All right. Well, excited to be here again. I'm Jerry Miller. If we haven't met before, I'm sure we'll have the chance soon. And
Mark McGahee, glad to be here again in trainings. If you've been back with us in previous years, we're really glad you're able to help continue with our success of evaluating the best bands in the state of Texas.
Yeah, best bands in the country. As we dive into this next block for our experienced judges, we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty of judging. We're going to talk about managing our numbers. We're going to talk about some of the other advanced judging tools that are available. Yes, we've spent the last couple of hours going through the sheets and making sure that everybody understands that, but we're going to dive deeper. Now, I thought rather than us just doing math for the next hour and a half, because we're all musicians and marching band people, and that may not be our strongest suit, so to speak, I wanted to kind of also give you and I a chance to do some exemplar recordings. And so I want to tell all of you that we've been building with TMAA, we've been building an exemplar file where you can listen to a full judge's recording. And we've picked some of the best judges doing some of the best judging for groups that are a range of, from groups that are prelims only, groups who don't advance to finals, groups in the bottom half of finals, state champions, like they're all in that. And if you look at the important links under, you'll find where you can go to those exemplars. But we're going to just like take some snippets of a few today, just get our heads in judging mode, so to speak. So I chose this first one. This is going to be Chip Krotz. Chip judged the 2023 6A State Marching Band Contest. And in this one, he's on music. I want you all to take a second. Listen to how Chip lets the show come to him. He allows the group to play. He reflects on what he hears, and then he kind of goes back in. And it's that back and forth and that push and pull that I think is really masterful in his judging here. Let's go ahead and hear Chip's call for this group.
Good sense of energy, quality, make sure just matching resonance side to side, that consistency, brass voice, a mellophone. Excellent listening, detailing down. Good full blend, 2D ensemble. Woodwinds, make sure as we come back up, we're really maximizing your dynamic to stay up with that brass intensity as long as possible. Good sense of articulation, style, brass voices. Just a little bit side to side in terms of slowing down the length as we get farther outside of that pocket with percussion. Make sure we're listening back. Percussion, we can still do more on those top dynamics with brass and woodwinds, really matching that intensity level. Ooh, appreciate the challenging technique. Take it down. Just that tendency of wanting to just push on the front of the tempo at those upper dynamic moments. Keep those nice and light. Stay back in the time. Beautiful color. Excellent technique through the quartet. They continue to make that sense of musicality and shape through the technical lines, the scalar passages. Yeah, we get a little bit better sense of Articulation here, low brass voices, matching high. And again, through the 2D woodwinds, given that opportunity just in terms of getting more out of the upper woodwind voice through the tenor.
All right. I could have listened to all of that.
Love it.
Chip's call is so good, I think, for me, because I feel like he owns the sheet. And everything that comes up, he almost kind of puts it into a little basket. You know, he's like, okay, this is in the woodwind articulation basket. This is over here in the tone contribution basket. This is over here in the color basket. Like, everything gets sorted really quickly. I can feel that cycle of impression, analysis, comparison. He gets an impression on a moment. He dives deep in the analysis, and then he offers a quick comment to it. I know this is your first time hearing it. What are your thoughts?
Put me on the spot here. He's an educated fan. If that was my group, I'd go, man, he is cheerleading us on, but he is one of the most educated people in the audience that day. As you could tell, he was using audible examples. If that's something you feel comfortable with, going digga-digga-dot-dot-dot-dot, trying to recollect it, feel free to do that. Don't feel like it's a requirement, but it is very distinct of, hey, I was responding exactly to this, and especially if he could show inflection, maybe it's worth the picture that goes into that. You would gather from that example, he was checking so many things off. He talked about balance and blending, he talked about articulation, he talked about musical expression, soloists, and he would react to this. And then it was constructive. I wish the woodwinds could do this. I like this woodwind moment. I wish this was more of it from a blend and balance. Then he talked about upper ends of the percussion part. So he's giving you constructive ideas. You walk out of it and you have a to-do list or like hey, this is great. And he's also like, wow, that's a couple of moments there that I never thought about before. And just what a great read on that, especially probably the first read.
I mean,
I've seen the group. Yeah.
And here's the thing: if these exemplars are helpful to you, and I had a couple of folks reach out to me and say they really felt like this helped them get ready for area. There's about a dozen of them, and that's one of them, but the full 8 minutes of Chip's take on that. So as we play a few exemplars, I figured, we've all been kind of basking in the glow of hotter than normal marching band over the last few weeks. And now is an opportunity for us to begin to immerse ourselves into that judging role and what that's going to feel like and sound like. And so I thought nothing better than to open with two really great exemplars. So I have one more for you. This is a 2A example. We're going to jump over to Beth Fabrizio. She made the call this is a music file from the 2A State Marching Band contest just last fall. Let's take a listen to Beth's file on this.
Good control tempo-wise, great verticality here. Again, all sorts of opportunities here for the crafting of the dynamic structure. The highs and the lows of the moment, so pretty. Yeah, that's an exposed moment. You've got 3 drum majors, so all you've got to do is take a little bit of an opportunity, again, of redefining the front end of the note stylistically and making sure that they understand how much air to take in prior to, and making sure that they understand how they're watching the majors' hands, because there's no tempo coming from the field. Love the final moment physically that we utilize. Clarity of the articulation here, too, is just to give us the direction. Da-da-dee-da-dum. Again, this can be crafted so many different ways, right? Such fun. Watch the clarity again, snares to tenor, and I think it has something to do with the technique being utilized, but I think it also has something to do with the tuning of the 2 snare drums. Careful how we use rim shots and the clarity of the rim shot. Love the use of chimes. I am a chime girl. It's a neat mid-voice brass voicing. Yeah, as we, again, physical and environmental listening areas change, right?
I especially like on Beth's that the positivity that goes into it, along with that encouragement and recognition of some of the environmental challenges that enter in. She doesn't just, I think as judges, we talk a lot about what and how. She almost goes into the why a little bit. Sure, and I think it's that real teacher step that she takes where she says, not only, this moment's a little bit imprecise and I'm hearing it as a little bit off. Why? It could be the tuning of those 2 snares. It's peeling back an additional layer as an educator.
What she also wasn't trying to rewrite the show. She was talking about the depth of it, and she said, hey, you can interpret that a lot of different ways there. She didn't say, this is my interpretation of it, but she did kind of recognize that in addition to those areas. I happen to know her. We know her real well. Woodwinds, I believe, is her primary instrument, but you would think that she was a percussion specialist, too. She was talking about the color of the snares to the tenors, so someone who's well-versed in those areas, that's where you can really gather and dig down pretty deep on an area that maybe make a weakness a strength. If something you're not comfortable with, see how you can dig into those different scoring areas. Again, that's like 2D battery percussion scoring versus we talked about front ensemble, and she's a chime, aficionado and learning all the different colors. But that's where the areas where you can really say, I'm going to go in a little bit deeper on a woodwind group, percussion group, brass group, etc.
Awesome. So we're going to come back to some exemplars just to break up the monotony of hearing Mark and I talk. We figured you should hear from some exemplars that are posted. But let's talk about managing our numbers. So we're going to kind of get into one of our roles and really arguably our most important role. The commentary is of the highest value. And many of you who are returning judges have not only been asked at area once, but you're being asked repeatedly to go out into area contests. And so with that, I think one of the things that I am very acutely aware of as a judge, yes, my commentary, but when I press stop, is that now my job as a numbers manager begins to make sure that I'm doing everything at the highest level. So I'm going to talk you through this, and I'm going to have Mark just kind of chime in as we make our way through this. As you remember from region and from area that we have this rating and ranking system, impression, analysis, and comparison, and now we're going to add these 5 tools, and we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking through all 5 of these tools when it comes to numbers management. And how do I make sure that the numbers that I record accurately reflect my assessments on the day? Number 1 is going to be using thirds. Numerical scale will be second, value of a tenth, subcaption integrity, and subcaption profiling. We're going to first talk about using thirds. What do I mean by using thirds is I'm specifically referring to the thirds on the box. So Ben, if you'll go to that slide that has the box on the bottom, rarely, sometimes, usually that strip along the bottom. And everybody's used to seeing these boxes. They have rarely, sometimes, usually, consistently, and always. And as you remember, when we redid these sheets, we divided these into thirds. So I thought we might just do a little definition of what's the lower third of the box, kind of in a definitive standpoint. What is that middle third, and then what is that upper third? I refer to the lower third of the box as emergence. It's the bridge between this box. Let's say we're talking box 4 and consistently. It's the bridge between consistently and usually. This band displays most of the components of consistently. Again, we're talking about box 4 right now. Most of the components within consistently. However, there are a couple of components that are back in that usually box still. As a judge, it may be unclear, like we don't feel great about putting them in that lower box. They feel like they have more tendencies in the upper box than in the lower. So we use that lower third of the box to slot that group. Is that how you think about lower third?
It is, and he used the word emergence. Just think of all the different synonyms that go with that, in introducing and just being able to, like he used the word crossover. I think that's important. They display some things that are commonplace, let's say in the previous box, but then there's some areas where, whether it be a section or a certain style, let's say it's a certain marching style, wow, they really execute their direction changes really well, and that kind of pops off the page. Or like this group maybe is kind of messy with precision, but they sure are expressive. Like all of a sudden things that start trying to fit in there. They can't hit all of the bullet points in the next box, but they're hitting some of them at different times.
Yeah. When we move into that middle box, the one that's in gray on the sheet, we're talking about realization. The band typically displays all attributes. They're living in that box. They're kind of in that center where there are some aspects of the performance that are in the lower part of the, again, let's use usually for this example. There are some aspects that are in the usually kind of lower part of it. It's trending toward sometimes, but it's still definitely. And then there are some that are trending toward consistently, but you find as you're making your recorded commentary, or in this case, you're reflecting back on the recorded commentary you just made, you're like, yeah, it's in that middle. It's in that realization box for me. Is that how you think about the middle?
Yes. layman's term, I believe, would be they are in this neighborhood and they've lived there for 20 years. It has that look about it. They've been there. Now, the fancy judge speak, would you use the word paradigm in this area? So that's a fancy kind of judge word, but they epitomize what box 4 is about, or what box 3 is about. And it's sometimes in judging that's really helpful, which Jerry may have talked about a little bit, where you're looking for benchmarks. Sometimes I even write down on that box, it was this group, and I look back at my notes and I'll compare other groups and go, well, I think they were kind of in that area. Well, I'll go, that's the group that I thought was 50-50. They were right in the dead center of box 3 or box 4, or even some of the thirds where I'm going to use as a comparison, which I'll be doing soon.
Yeah, yeah. And then into that upper box, this is fulfillment. This is some of the components, and again, we'll go back to using box 4 for this example. Some of the components are trending toward the next upper box. You found yourself saying to the trumpets, always, or synonyms of always. Just, the fulfillment is very strong. All those things are at the very highest level, but there are still the majority of things are just in that upper edge of consistently. The band displays more components that are in that lower box than in the upper, but you can feel them trending in that direction. And so I think that's fulfillment of the box. They've really fulfilled everything in that box. They're trending up, but they don't yet have the majority of components in that next kind of lower section of the next box up.
Most of the bullet points, if not all the bullet points, are in that area. Yeah, there's one that's kind of teeter-tottering right there, but again, it's your decision on that day where you could say, you know what, I consider that really in the fulfillment category, which is the top box.
And so to Mark's point, let's show them this next little chart with the single blue line on it. Let's say we are tracking bands moment to moment, and this is all fictitious. This isn't based on anything. I said they have 10 moments in their show. The first moment is maybe a 2D hit, and then it's a low brass thing, and then they go to a percussion thing, and then it's a woodwind moment. And let's just say that on a scale of 1 to 100 here, I decided to go like, wow, that was like a 78 for me, and then that climb there. There is a trick about kind of establishing this because bands are going to show you a wide variety of quality levels across different moments. Those may be aligning well with our boxes. It may be that the woodwind moments are a little bit lower, the brass moments are higher. Maybe the percussion moments are right in the middle of box 4 for you. And so you end up with a chart kind of like this. But to show you some of the other profiles, let's go to the next one, and I kind of overlaid them. A school like this one in orange, for instance, where the show starts really strong, but as the show works, and so you start and you see that first impact, you're like box 4. And then as they get to that next moment, you're like, oh no. And you feel them kind of just cascading down through
diminishing,
those boxes. Let's add the next one. For example, this one, again, just silly examples, but ideas of where whenever the 2D band plays, you're like, wow, they have polished these 2D moments to be well into box 4, yet whenever we just hear the isolated brass, the isolated percussion, the isolated woodwind, the solos, they feel very underdeveloped, and they're more in that box 3. And so these are just some of the different profiles that I think, and I don't know if you want to talk about any others that you might feel like you see as a judge, or some of the problem spots that maybe can weigh you down a little bit.
Let me ask you this question. We've talked about in the commentary, judging over the course of time. Would you consider this my evaluation judging over the course of time? Like it's almost like a scale. Like sometimes I can visualize a scale where there's a meter. I'm looking at the boxes on the bottom, and I'm just kind of seeing this line kind of move back and forth. It's up, it's down, it's staying up, it's staying up, it's staying down. It's kind of locks in, and it's they're telling you the story. They're telling who you are today. And I don't know. I think of those two kind of working in conjunction.
Well, and I would love for it to be clean. I would love for you to say that the woodwinds were slotted straight in box 4 today, but maybe in that woodwind lyrical moment they were box 4, but in that technical moment they were showing more aspects of the box 3. And that's where I think those thirds really come into play for us, is that you have that opportunity to kind of think through that. And so, don't be afraid to write on. I mean, we're not giving them written sheets anymore, but if you want to print some blanks to have with you. And I'll tell you, the most challenging groups for me are the ones where they don't fit the boxes super well. If it's everything the woodwinds are doing are generally in that usually zone, but everything that the brass do are generally in that consistently zone. Right. That's an easier sheet for me to write than when we have that numbers situation where everything technical lacks clarity, but all the lyrical stuff is beautiful and expressive, is where you really find that you're having to flex your muscle on the thirds and figure out where you are. But I'm hoping that we've put a tool into your toolkit, and this is one of 5, is this use of thirds. Let's jump back to an exemplar. So again, I don't want to weigh you down too deep with this, but I know we have lots of experienced folks here. This is going to be Wayne Dillon. Wayne was judging brass, so we're just talking about kind of tracking moment to moment of what we hear, and Wayne's judging brass in this moment at the state marching contest last year. Let's take a listen.
Very even crescendo to the tacit. Very good melodic clarity there, mellophone. Good tonal integrity in the upper register as well. Very good job on the diminuendo. Good for you. It's a good matching of accentuation, style of attack at that middle dynamic range. Once again, very well detailed and contoured. They seem to really understand the big picture, the broad strokes, the smaller strokes, and how they connect together musically. Good spot here to regulate your breath, huh?
Yeah, like Wayne even gets into the end about good spot to regulate your breath. Like, he is in the role of a brass performer. Yes. Like, I feel like he's putting himself into the group's uniform. He's putting himself on the field. He's holding a mellophone, and he's thinking about the contribution at this dynamic range versus this, and how the group moves between dynamic ranges, and how the ensemble is able to regulate their breath at the end of those big moments. What else?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Wayne, he's an incredible trumpet player, and then he has evolved into where he was an effective teacher, and then now I think he's just as an effective educator or evaluator and adjudicator, where he is thinking about the performance level of it. I love his overall tenor, his overall tone, where it's real inviting, but he's also just being able to kind of describe each of those moments along the way, and even just, hey, the expressiveness is appreciated there and what it took to make that moment happen.
Yeah, yeah. Let's do another exemplar. For me, as a judge, as a young judge especially, I leaned on the exemplars that were shared with us, not just of the folks who had judged my groups, but I know, like, coming through the DCI training system, there was always a great opportunity to hear folks make calls. I think that, and some of you may be upset with me for saying it, the percussion folks do some of the best wrap-ups. And what I mean by the wrap-up is you've talked your way through the whole show, and they play the last note, and you've got about a minute to just kind of surmise. And this is one from state last year that Mike Leitsky did on percussion, and I think they do just such a great job. You can hear in this example Mike talking to every section almost as if he was their percussion instructor, and he said, hey, battery, hey, front ensemble, circle up, snares, tenors. You'll just hear him talk through. Let's check out Mike's wrap-up here with this group at the 6A State Marching Contest last year.
Have some tough environmental challenges there. At the end, manipulation of the listening environment through time. Not always quite dialed in from section to section or from player to player. In those moments where you have the manipulation of the center of pulse as the phrase develops on. So just continue to work on the performer's ability to, interpret time and where it's coming from, and that'll help to elevate some of those segments to the next level. Front ensemble, a lot of unison lines there that are, pretty challenging and exposed. Some rhythmic density presence throughout the presentation, and just the approach from player to player, not always consistent in terms of the amount of velocity into the instrument, but where the mallet is striking the bar, the amount of core that's playing through, the amount of mallet that's playing through the center of the bar, just arm angles. Some individuals just a little bit higher than others to the instrument, so it causes some balance and blend challenges. In metallics, I thought did a pretty good job of handling the isolated melodic lines that you've given them. The exposure there is really difficult, especially when you add and layer in in the synth right-hand melodic lines, the ability to communicate there is really, really challenging, and performers generally did a good job of handling that challenge.
So what I think is really special about Mike's wrap-up, he starts with addressing the challenges that the ensemble faced, how well they overcame those challenges. He uses scoring-specific language. You hear him say, he uses always, but as a not, as a negative, to be like, not always. I'm not going to be putting this into box 5. I think that I didn't look at the score off the recap for this particular group, but I'm sure it was somewhere in that box 4 neighborhood. He talks about the isolation, the struggles in the front ensemble with regard to the challenges that they faced and how he was impressed with the ways they overcame them. He talked about layering. What other impressions do you get off of just hearing his wrap up?
The impression I get is we've talked about earlier in the previous session, sometimes this couldn't be, you're a wind player and maybe this isn't your forte and you're like, oh, what do I even say to them? Well, he's a percussionist judging percussion specific things. I don't think he would have made many of these comments if he didn't feel the performers performed at such a high level. He knew this would be complimentary. They would have a good understanding and not go, what is he talking about there? Maybe the language is a little bit different, but I think it was a huge compliment to this ensemble that he was talking about so many detailed upper level things. And again, you would walk away feeling really good, but going, yeah, you're right. That particular run wasn't maybe our best run in that moment. And he was very accurate in how he assessed it.
Yeah. And so I'm hoping that off of these exemplars, you're able to find some inspiration. And the full ones you can listen to in full scale. And thanks to the directors who allowed me to utilize and share those. We're now going to talk about numerical scale. What I mean by numerical scale is, and I'm especially thinking about the area judges who are going into 35 and 40 band prelims. Like, you are about to have a very long day. What are some scoring resources you can use? Well, first off, there is in that important links document, you can see that very colorful tote sheet, Ben, if you could share that with them with all the bright colors on it. And that sorts things green, yellow, red into top box, or it's upper third, middle third, lower third, and on and on and on from there. You can find downloadable versions of that if you want to have them printed, if you want to do. I personally judge on my laptop now, and I type those scores so that I can keep track of it. But I want to offer you a model for numerical scale that you can use. You don't have to use this model if you have another numerical one. But if you're just going to go in blind, especially if you happen to be at an area with between 30 and 40 plus groups, I want to try and help you not do what we call boxing yourself out, right? And not getting yourself in a tough situation. So let's you and I look at this together. What I would aim to do, let's say there are 40 bands, just for the sake of even numbers. In that first block, a numerical scale, I'm going to use numbers that end in 0 for as much as I can. We have 1,000 points to work with, so when I say numbers that end in 0, think about you still have 100 numbers to work with, right? So you still have plenty of room for 10 bands, right? Say it's 10 bands in 4 blocks, right? You still have plenty of room. I try to use as many numbers ending in 0 as I can to get things to lay out in those thirds and inside of those boxes. And so, for example, if you'll go on to that next one, Ben, that shows bands 1 through 10, my box might look like this. At the end of it, I would have a 760 and a 640, a 600 and an 830, a 910, et cetera, right? That's what it might look like. Now, if I move that over to that colorful sheet on the next slide, do you feel like I'm at risk for, did I give all the groups? Well, yeah, I have a middle of box 5 group. They must have been really good. And then I have a lower box 5. I have a middle box 4. I don't have anybody in the upper box 4 yet. So I've given myself plenty of room to spread out and not feel compressed. And then I move into the second block. And what I do, and again, you don't have to take on mine. And I'm going to ask Mark in a second kind of how he maybe does this, but I kind of liked in that second block to use 0s and 5s. And that's not to say that I won't break this rule, but I want to go into it with the mindset in the second block. So now when you go to those two, you can see my band 1 scores 1 through 10, and the next slide, but then you can see 11 through 20, 705, 625, 685. I used 430. I used a 0 because that was an option to me that I hadn't used. And now when you look at that colorful tote sheet, I'm going to my lunch break, and I have very little stress about my numbers.
You probably won't have any ties, and if you have, you get some problems.
Yeah,
that you've
like,
already tied someone. Yeah,
there's such
plenty of room.
Yes, such a low likelihood that I'm setting myself up for a stressful tie scenario, because I've still got it. In the worst case here, I don't think I have a group if you look bottom to one column, top of the next, there are some maybe 9 spaces in between groups, but I've still got plenty of room. So now I go eat my lunch. I'm feeling good about my numbers. I'm going into block number 3. Again, this is what I do. I keep my 0s and 5s. They're always in play now. I start using 2s and 7s, right? And I try and just get those 2s and 7s to begin to work. So with that, I have about 400 slots available on the sheet that I haven't used yet. And so you can see band 1 through 10, 11 through 20, and 21 through 30 now, 780. I'm still using my 0s from earlier today, 660, 580, but I do need to squeeze. In that end, you see that 30th band of the day? Oh my gosh, 30 bands in. And I used a 617. Okay, I needed it. I needed that space. So what does that colorful tote sheet look like? And I'm going to show you an example of how this is done poorly in a little while. But now I still have so few worries about ties because I've used my 2s and 7s. And now I'm going into the last block. Well, in the last block, I can use any number I want.
Yes.
Everything's wide open. I'm going to have plenty of room. The chance that in that last block, even if I had a group that was 5 places up from their neighbor, the chance that there are going to be 4 groups that need to fit in the middle of that is just slim to none. So you can see bands 1 through 40 all the way through, and I used all my numbers. And then if you'll go to that colorful scale at the very end, and again, I didn't have to use box 1. I didn't use box 2. I did use the bottom of box 3 for a couple of groups, right? So for the most part, there is nothing on here that gives me too much concern. There is a little bit of a traffic jam in the upper end of box 3, and that's not uncommon, I don't think, in box 3 for there to be a fair amount of traffic. It is the largest box. I don't know what other...
When I started judging, I wish I would have had something like this to help me out, because many times it was putting things down and I was sort of approximate, and they would be, oh no, I have a bottleneck in a certain area. Sometimes that can get us in trouble when we have numbers that are too many in the same neighborhood. They're too close together. You don't want to artificially put something down where I have to really spread these guys out and put them in a box too. But again, it's an organized way of keeping things going. What if you used odds and evens? What if you started with odds? I mean, it's a little bit more broad scale, but again, it could be something where it kind of gives you a place. That way, when you do have like, wow, they are so much like band A and we're on band G again, I can still see a space above them and a space below them that I could make the call where I can put them in. And again, if this is prelims, for instance, your job is to put the right number of bands into finals, and you're maybe looking at it. Sometimes the tote sheet tells a story. It shows you there's an obvious space, and that's a breaking point. Or these are the groups that are on the bubble. If it's 10 that are in finals, I'm looking really closely at groups 9, 10, 11, and 12, and just making sure I really got the ones, because those are some critical decisions of who's going to be in the night show and who's not.
Well, and to your point, sometimes when that gap falls after 10 bands, I'm like, whew, I feel good about who my 10 are. When it falls after 9, I'm like, okay, well, somebody's going to get a finals vote for me, and I feel like it's this one. I worry when the gap is 11 or 12 and I'm only taking 10 in finals. I really, as you said, I really closely look at 9, 10, 11, and 12, just making sure, reflecting back on my notes and what I have on the day to make sure that I am advancing the right number into that finals show. So with numerical scale, those 1,000 available numbers, we should be flexible to draw from wherever we want. So I'm going to pull up a numerical scale example where things aren't done well. So if you'll advance forward to the 4 boxes in that slide, and then the colorful ones that follow it, and we're just going to kind of go through each block as we go. But you can see in that next colorful one, I'm done with the morning block, we're okay. I go on to that second one, and things are all ready. When I go to lunch, I've got a break of just 4 bands in one spot. You
still have 20 plus bands to
Yeah, and I'm halfway through the contest, and I'm already getting close. If you go to that third one, now things are getting really, really cozy. And as I go into that fourth one, I've got groups stacked on top of groups in all these tight weight. I just think like you're setting yourself up for some uncomfortable conversations. Okay.
Looks like my tote sheet from last bless October.
No. So, thinking about spreading it out is really going to help you as you go. Okay. So again, we're just wanting to present some tools. So what we talked about using the thirds of the boxes. Everybody feel good about, I feel good about using thirds. Yes. Numerical scale. You have a system. As Mark said, you can do the odds and evens. You can do all of those work. So you now have a good sense of numerical scale and what that needs to be. Now we're going to talk about value of a tenth. Now, what I mean by value of a tenth is, all right, Jerry, well, how do I, like kind of Mark said, you don't want to spread things out too wide. Is there a definition that I can use? And so I want to offer you kind of what I think works in terms of value of a tenth. So let's go to that first slide that explains the value of a tenth. The value of a tenth is really focusing on the bottom line score, not the individual boxes, just what is the bottom line, bottom right-hand corner score. And this is just another tool to try and help you manage your numbers really, really well. So I'm going to give you I think I have 4 scenarios outlined here. Let me see. Yeah, I have 4 scenarios outlined here. In scenario number 1, we're talking about out of 1,000 points, a lot of points, these groups are within 60 points of each other, right? In my mind, these groups are really close. In fact, in my mind, if they're going to both go on in finals, they could flip.
Sure could.
They are that close. So think about what that looks like on that tote sheet. They're not only in the same column, but they're within the same half of the same column. That's how close together they are. That to me means there are distinct differences. Clearly band A is above band G, to use your example. But between prelims and finals, they're so close out of 1,000 points that things could turn if one had a not great show and the other one didn't. And you can kind of see in that colorful example next, I'm talking about they're close to each other in the column. They're not far apart, right? Now, I go to the next scenario. Let's say they're between 60 and 125. So now they're about a full column apart on the tote sheet. These groups have narrow differences. Let's say it like this. If for some reason, Dr. Ken, I'm not saying this to stress you out, we had to delay finals by a week and those groups had a week to rehearse and then they came back, they could switch places, but that night they're not going to switch places. It's already done, right? They're that far apart. They're not going to trade places. But if they had a week to rehearse and one of them had a really great week and the other one had monsoon season at their campus, there maybe could be some shifting. But this is what we're talking about. We're a full column off, right? That judge needs to be prepared to talk about those differences. You talked about it on your file, and those groups understand that that's kind of what they're seeing.
A musical example could be both groups are technically proficient with the same level of high demand. One group used more musical expression while the other one came across as a little bit more of a craft. It could be in sections. If I'm looking at all 5 of my boxes, I just didn't get a lot of woodwind contribution tonight from where I was compared to this other group, and everybody else was a dead heat all the way across. It was a push. Visually, maybe it was individual marching was really good, but then this other group just had a little bit more clear ensemble. The intervals were really good. The arrival at set was really good with this other group. And there was always someone kind of pushing and pulling, and we never got those locks. It was just a little bit each time where it was a more of a major systemic idea rather than just a performance idea.
Absolutely. So you can see what these look like. They are nearly a full column apart in that colorful sheet, right? They are way far apart now, okay? Let's go on to the next type. This is a group that is 125 to 250. We're now 2 columns over almost, a full column and some, or 2 columns over. There are significant differences, like your descriptors are different. With one group, you're talking about consistently. With the other group, usually the clarinets are in step. Usually the flags go around together, right? These are easily identifiable. And I think I like you use the term about Chip Krotz, that he is a highly educated audience member. Even a regular audience member recognizes that these 2 groups are not in the same neighborhood. They live in different parts of our tote sheet. If that contest were 3 or 4 weeks away, maybe there's a chance. But at area, this decision has been cemented probably for 3 or 4 weeks. And you can see on that colorful example, this is over a full column away. This is like you're skipping columns between groups. And so when you start to think about spreading them out, I don't want you to falsely spread groups into, as Mark said, we don't want you to falsely spread groups into box 2 and force that, because you probably don't need it that often. But do you have to have that opportunity to spread them out enough to say, these 2 could go on tonight, band A and band G, and gosh, they could switch places on me. Or these 2 could go on tonight, and I still don't see a way that band A is ever going to catch band G. The last group, if they differ by 250 points or more, there's not a chance this season that group could catch it. Even if they went back to summer band in a time machine and started over, it's just not going to happen for those ensembles. And you can see those are 2.5 columns away. So if this, from a value of a 10th perspective, helps you with, right, so think about your tools. You've got your use of thirds in the boxes. You're using your numerical scale. And now, hopefully we've helped you with the ideas about how far apart to put the groups. You're going in with a really healthy mindset about managing your numbers in a positive way.
Those numbers show up with the directors getting to see, correct? But
they do. I'm going to show you that in just a second.
And then the ordinals, that's the one where it shows the placings. Those don't always tell the specific of a story. They will show the rankings necessarily, but I think it's really good because this will help you, and you get the rankings. You're not having to worry about it, not sweating it. You're going, yep, that's exactly the ranking I wanted, and I had everyone as close or as far apart as I needed them to be.
One, I think it helps me as a director too. If I am advancing to state, if I'm advancing into finals, it helps me set up my kids and their expectations. I can, the ordinals, you're right, they tell a story, but everybody's going to be 1 or 2 or at most 10 ordinals apart, as opposed to this. If we're 250 points different from a group, then in my mind I have to say to myself, we're not going to catch this group, whether we're trying to win area, finals or advance to state or whatever that might be. Let's talk a little bit about subcaption integrity, and I hope that Joe Munoz will forgive me. I made him my example here of the good judge, and I'm the bad judge. So, Joe, thank you for being the good judge here. And so when we talk about subcaption integrity, what we're talking about is each caption stands alone. The brass, let's think about the music sheet. The ensemble, brass, woodwind, percussion, and content. And our role, as best we can, is to assess what and how inside of every one of those areas from an integrity standpoint. So when you look at, can we zoom in on the subcaption integrity thirds? It's like a little graph at the bottom, usually consistently always. When I zoom into this, I want to be sure that I'm just thinking about, let's say I'm judging visual in this example. I'm the visual judge, and Joe's my other visual counterpart, and we're looking at just a particular set of groups, right? That I'm thinking about my visual individual versus the ensemble, that I'm able to separate those two. Now, do they influence it? Well, sure. I mean, I think that good individual marchers will generally result in ensembles who march well. By the same, can though, and we've all seen this group, a group where the individuals aren't super strong, but they arrive at their sets together, they depart their sets together. Those kind of things work well. And so, for example, as we make our way through in terms of subcaption integrity, we can see, and Ben, do you have the one with the green, the blue, can we show them that one? If maybe they're already seeing it. Inside of this one, you may have, look at that band in red, really challenging drill, well done simultaneous responsibility and some minor performance issues, versus band 2 in blue, where the drill was standard, the simultaneous responsibilities were pretty standard visually. There were a few performance issues. What about band 3 over in green, where they had some concerns for you and they had several performance issues? Or band 4, where it was very challenging and they were unimpeded by any of the things that were kind of placed in front of them. This is a good example of kind of using thirds and spreading yourself out over the course of that to develop some integrity to the captions. And I'm going to show you, we're going to pause for an exemplar, but when we come back to it, because we're talking about visual individual here, I want you to think about kind of how you're going to use those thirds, how you're going to use your numbers, how you're going to separate things really well, but also how each sub-caption exists on an island. I'll tell you where I see a fault in this is if a group is across the board in 7th place, woodwinds, brass, percussion, ensemble, and content, everything 7, I go, are they really in 7th place in all of those?
Literally, yeah.
I mean, I think visual maybe isn't the best example because they do tend to go hand in hand a little bit more. But like in music, if I saw a group that was in 7th place, now, if they're in 1st place across the board, that's a little more believable to me.
Very well could be, yeah.
Because they're just that good. But if they're in 7th place, I'm like, really, their percussion, there were 6 groups better and 23 groups worse, and there were 6 woodwind groups better, and are they the same? I go, did everything have the integrity that we're looking for to it? And so,
well, did I say I wanted the bottom line to be something, and I made the numbers work, which is, don't do that. It's believing that the subcaption focus is going to take care of the bottom line for you. That's where the trust in your training really has to come through. It's okay that a certain section doesn't come up there. It's a great snapshot for the band and the director to see, oh, here's what it is. Nobody gets the blame necessarily, but it does show here's some growth in some areas, or here who's leading the pack in their particular band program.
Yeah. So this is maybe my favorite exemplar, especially on the visual front, that I'm going to play for you all today. This is Hugh Wynn, and he is downstairs at the state marching contest last year in 6A doing a visual recording. And I aspire to be a visual judge at this level because I feel like in the short, probably 90 seconds that we listen to this file, I feel like he talks to so many kids and so many sections and offers positive commentary and offers opportunities for growth. Let's check out Hugh's recording.
Excellent core control for the mellophones as you coming up. Detail through that level change, significant, superior control there. Excellent to the initiation of the tendu, emphasis of the plie, visual musicality, quite strong. Percussion as well, excellent level intensity, churn out, rotation, very compelling. Wow. Handling this slow, broader stride, relationship to one another, flutes over on side 2, excellent. As you shift away from side to side, orientation is extremely consistent. Color guards, you want to find that suspension quality and detail as you work that flat position before you go into the ground, and you ensure they're not kind of plopping on down, but elevated responsibility through that inverted position. Percussion, working the backup technique, yes, gliding through that space ever so successfully. As you shift your weight to the left side, backup orientation, backfield. Wow, so confident, controlled, excellent positioning through the churn, centering principles for the flutes and the trumpets. Very compelling. Clarity is exceptional. Clarinets up front, brass. Such pronounced posture, clarity through those initiations. Excellent.
I aspire to catch that many things visually and just be so quick and articulate and have just a set of adjectives at my fingertips where I can not only, like, I feel like Hugh always leads with what he's seeing. You know, here's what I'm observing, and then really quickly follows it with how well it's being done by the performers. There's never a doubt as to who he's talking to. There's never a doubt as to what he's actually seeing in the moment. Like, he defines it at a very high level.
I lost count of how many groups he sampled in that. It was, boy, if I was a student, it was like, man, he is addressing everyone in the band, and in many cases positively so. Man, that was great.
Yeah, I just feel like his eyes are very active around the field. There wasn't a moment where I felt like he had, you know, we say let the show come to you, and I think visually I feel like he is doing twice the work, because I feel like as he's talking about one, he's setting himself up for that next moment, which is just ridiculously impressive. So we're going to come back to one more. Again, we wanted to present just some different ideas about managing numbers. In talking to a lot of you after the area round last year, many of you who were back judging, one of the things you said was that the talking about numbers really helps me wrap my head around it. And so we have one more. We talked about subcaption integrity and how we need to make sure that we keep those lines clear. And I think that's especially important on the music sheet. I do want to talk about a little bit of profiling, and profiling and integrity in this case are going to go a little bit hand in hand for us with the UIL sheets. But if we'll go on to define it, what we're taking care to ensure is that, as I said before, these woodwind scores remain independent of brass and percussion across multiple groups. A group could compare, as Mark was talking about earlier with their rankings, where their woodwinds ranked. Right? If we were giving out, we're not doing this, if we were giving out at area a first, second, third place woodwind trophy, that group could look at it and be like, wow, we were the first place woodwinds from these judges. We were the third place percussion. I'm sure the percussion folks look at it. We were the, you could begin to see that because I don't see block ratings down the line. And so if you'll go forward to the subcaption profiling, the first example there with Mr. Munoz at the top. And for example, his looks great. As you look from left to right, he had the first place group in first across the board. It is not something uncommon that we see across the state, that there's a lot of, at areas, a really clear leader. But look at that second place group. He has their ensemble in second, their woodwinds are in third, their brass are in fifth, their percussion were in seventh, the content was fourth. That's really well done. I feel like that is exactly what I would want to see. As we look at the third place group for him, he has a fifth, a sixth, a third, a fourth, and a third. And as you look at that bottom group, now remember, this was his second place group overall, which is fine. Obviously the recap is in the order of how they scored from the 3 music and the 2 visual judges. But you look at that bottom group, and he has a third place ensemble, but then he has some other groups in a second across the board. That's what I tend to see in really clean and well done recaps from veteran judges like Mr. Munoz. I tend to see the first place group is first in a lot of areas. I mean, there are some really competitive area contests where that might be shared, but in a lot of them, the second place group is usually second in some areas, but they have a 3 and maybe a 1. Maybe they have a 3 and then the third place group has some third place, but then they might have a 5. They might have a 4 somewhere. They may even see a 6 as you do here.
Well, each of those tell a story. Could you, Jerry, could you quickly just kind of say when you look at the first group there, what that obviously tells you they're far
clearly outstanding.
The pack.
Yeah.
What does the second ensemble tell you?
Yeah,
just by looking at those rankings.
Yeah. So if I look at the group that has a total rank of 5 at the end, as I look at that one, what I see is really strong ensemble skills, but when the woodwinds got isolated, they weren't quite as strong as the full ensemble. When the brass got isolated, we struggled. We were not on level with where we should have been. And then most importantly, the percussion was not helping.
Probably
now,
when they were featured, probably something a little notier, probably something a little bigger.
But could also, and we talked to our new judges about this, could have also been a balance issue where they were overplaying the whole show.
Absolutely.
And that caused that to, and then content is in fourth, meaning they had the show was perhaps a little bit more challenging. Just using all the other factors was perhaps a little more challenging than where the kids were that day.
But the next line, the next ensemble?
Yeah, and then the next group, you see an ensemble that struggled, woodwinds that struggled, but a brass and percussion section that were a little more dialed in than the woodwinds.
Yes.
Yeah, and then the content was a little bit stronger than the group that actually outscored them, at least overall in the contest. And so, as Mark said, it tells a story when you start breaking down recaps. And so our role as judges, okay, let's go, Ben, would you go to the next slide? I'm the bad judge here. I used myself. This is a fake contest, by the way. This is bad. The first is all in first, the second's almost all in second, the third's almost all in third, the fourth's almost all in fourth. It could look like this, but I think if we're really doing a good job of weighing every single thing out, the second place group is going to have more than maybe just 1/3, and they may have a 4. So just what I'm encouraging you to do as you go out and judge area is think really diligently in those silos. And yes, the coordination of everything is so important and how all of that comes together, but let's not forget that the sheet asks us to assign numerical value to these 5 areas of music and then the 3 areas on the visual side. So just as Mark said, trying to aim for a bottom line number is not a positive way to judge. The best way that we can judge is by really truly evaluating each caption independently Yes, there are synergistic moments where the brass and the percussion are going to play together, and a bad percussion moment where they falter for timing will definitely impact the brass who are supposed to be featured with them, right? So we do have to think about those things, but at the same time, that independent kind of siloing of the captions really gives us the most pure look at the groups that we're seeing that day. I'm going to skip on from that one, Ben. I'll skip past that other example to just talk to you about kind of all of these additional tools. So take with me back up to the top, scoring and summarizing the process. We began with ratings and rankings. We gave numbers and we ranked them and then we got into impression analysis comparison. We walked them through that cycle of getting an impression of how they do things, analyzing it, comparing it, and now we added on the use of the thirds. And look, the more of these 5 tools you use at the bottom, the more accurate you're going to be. Did you use all the thirds? Did you have a numerical scale and an idea of a numbers strategy out of 1,000 points that you were going to use going into the day? Did you understand how to gap the groups well, both in terms of how you talked to the groups, but also in terms of how their scores were spread? Were these subcaptions across the board, were we able to get the separation and the profiling the way that we wanted them to give that director an accurate depiction of how their group did that day in that single performance for you at area? That's really what we're all aiming for inside
Probably,
of this.
and you're doing your practicing and preparation. I think this slide is critical. We talked about your commentary, trying to be fluid, trying not to stumble over your words. Let's say you have just you and the performance on the YouTube video. When it ends, why don't you have this sheet next to it with the judging rubric, and why don't you just slowly at your own pace, nobody's on the clock, nobody's timing you, just kind of see how you can fit through this. You're like, well, I'm going to put my number down. Oh, I didn't really consider the value of the 10th really well. Oh, the subcaption integrity was anywhere like I wanted to do it. And again, it's just kind of working through the worksheet and saying, let me just focus on this category. How did I do? And you're going through a reminder checklist, and it'll get better, but it could be another way to practice it in addition to just the commentary.
And remember, if you judged last year, which a lot of you did, you can sign into Competition Suite as a judge, because all but one area in 2A used Competition Suite. You can pull your recap from last year, and this analysis that Mark and I were just doing, you can do it on your own numbers, and it is humbling, to say the least. As somebody who's done it a lot, you can go back, and if you just log into your Competition Suite, choose previous season, and you can go into it, and you can actually see those recaps and really ask yourself critically, how did I do in terms of these numbers? So something to think about. We're going to do another exemplar. Actually, you know what? Can we had that earlier video that Mark Nichols gave us about content. It'll actually kind of tie well together, I think. So earlier for our new judges, we asked directors from around the state to submit different videos and ways they could help, and how ways we could help as judges. And so you're welcome after this broadcast post. You can go back and look at any of those. They were wonderful submissions. One of them we weren't able to show earlier, but we're going to show it to you now. This is Mark Nichols from China Spring, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about just content in general, and then we'll do one more exemplar.
First one I want to just start with is the idea of blend and balance. I think at times the typical comment that we hear is, hey, that is someone sticking out of the sound. I would just challenge everyone to also be listening for maybe we didn't balance the sound correctly. And there are people that are underplaying the sound, just to really hear all the voices. You know, if it's a brass feature, are we hearing all the brass players? If it's a woodwind feature, are we hearing all the woodwind players? Things like that. And that kind of parlays into another thing with dynamic contrast and precision and timing. You know, oftentimes we'll get these huge impact moments, and if they don't go well, you know, there's instant comment on anything that they can do. And the idea of how rigorous playing at those volumes are to achieve maybe more of a dynamic contrast, you know, as long as the sounds are characteristic. Sometimes potentially we are not getting rewarded on how hard that is to create those big kind of volume fill moments, and that has to do with student numbers and everything. But you know, when someone plays something that's a big thing, but they've backed it off to maybe say mezzo forte instead of a true forte or fortissimo, hearing a note start sometimes is a little harder and it's a little fuzzier. Whereas if you have a whole band that goes in, there's a big breath, and they're going to downbeat at fortissimo, there's a little bit more rigor involved, and it goes to balance and blend, precision and timing, all those things. So as we think about just the music ensemble performance box, just understanding, that, when bands, if they can produce larger volumes, well, there's a certain amount of rigor in that, and that in the idea of balance and blend, we have the ability to play too loud. There are students that can play too loud. There's also ability for sections to play too soft and kind of hide in the background. And just some over the years that we've been doing this, the comments we receive and how we try to handle that in rehearsal. I think that's some things that make sure we're rewarding and recognizing, hey, that was a big hit, and it was perfectly in time, really in tune. Everyone's matching energies. Wow, great job. Or it's, hey, that's a big hit. That's really hard to do. We have some people underplaying the energy. We have some people overplaying the energy, and using those words to kind of describe what we're hearing. So that's going to be my short video. Thank you for taking the time to go through this training and be there for everyone. I know it's super valuable to receive comments throughout the state, throughout all of the great educators here, and hopefully this will be helpful.
Yeah, so if you liked Mark's video, there are a ton of those that we showed to our new judges from directors all over the state, 2A, 4A, and 6A. And don't worry, for my 1A, 3A, 5A friends, you're going to get all the love next year as we kind of alternate back and forth. As I hear him talk, I like and it's going to play well into what we're about to hear from Joel Denton and this exemplar in a second, but the important tie-in that content plays to what's asked of the performers, how well they're achieving it, and the decisions that the group's made. And we talked earlier with our new judges about, you make a wide variety of decisions with your ensemble. If you choose to play that at fortissimo, what are the risks, and and if you play it safe, does that still open yourself up to the same level of recognition as if you were to, kind of step out there on that?
Yeah, it's the triad of a performer, the emotional, the physical, and the emotional. He's talking about, obviously the people sticking out. Sometimes it's an awareness level. Sometimes it's a great player that's just really into the moment. They're not trying to hurt the group by any means, but just really overly emotional about that. And again, just trying to keep everyone in balance. And you're evaluating what you think it is, but again, just addressing it and let them come up probably to the why, I guess, as they hear those moments.
Yeah. So here's one final exemplar from you. And again, I hope I've plugged these well. There's an entire folder, and I'm going to continue to fill it. If you look at the region folder in the exemplars, there aren't a lot because, as you know, we only had a few regions. I think 4 regions piloted Competition Suite last year, so we don't have a lot to draw from there. But on the area and the state front, there's a ton of them in there. So please dive in and help yourself. Here's a short one from Joel Denton doing the content and design caption at 6A State last year.
Oh, think about the release. It was good, but it could have been great if we had all just tapered together. And double swing flag. This is a stunning moment right here, color-wise. Good for you. Wonderful. And I thought that was a better release. I still think we could have lilted it up just a little bit. Just that sip in at the end, just to give it a little more resonance. And then we come back to this beautiful duet color. Outstanding writing. Orchestrating. And wonderful players.
Yeah, it's such a tender moment, and it's good to hear him kind of just pace them through what he's observing and highlighting. And again, remember at state, that content and design, you can kind of go anywhere that you feel led by the ensemble. And he's talking about the use of color, not only the instrumental color, musical color, but visual color over the course of that as well. And so, nothing exists in isolation. And so I so appreciate, the folks who can come into our state and really on a first read for a lot of them have a good sense of what's being asked of the performers, and then how well those students are able to to achieve that.
That was a great example. There's so many myths about how we started this process with this sheet. It would be, it's just going to be all about design. It's about the stuff on the field or the show. He talked more about how the performers brought it to life than anything, and they do go hand in hand with the two boxes on the sheet, and I love that. He kept giving them credit, like, you're taking this vehicle and perpetuating it, driving this vehicle for us, and he was putting more of his efforts into that as much the adults creating the product for them.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah, very, very student-centered. It's time for quiz number 4. If we'll put up the slide for quiz number 4, for those of you who, if you're a returning judge or a new judge, everyone takes quiz number 4. You'll find your name in the drop-down. If for some reason you don't find your name, scroll to the bottom and choose I can't find my name, and then you can type it in there. You can either scan the QR code with a separate device, or you can go into the important links document, and you can click on quiz number 4. New judges take quizzes 1, 2, 3. Everybody takes quiz 4 and 5. I'm starting the timer now. All right. Hopefully you did well on quiz 4. You can go back and take these quizzes at any point. If it didn't work for you today, don't worry. You can click on it on your own and pull it up, or if you just want to take it to max out your score, whatever you like. But that was quiz number 4. We have one more quiz to take. This next unit is going to focus exclusively, I'm going the wrong way, exclusively on competition suite. I was telling Mark, this is probably the last time that we'll do a competition suite unit. We started using it at state in 21, and in 2022 it got used in every area but one, and in 2023 it's getting used at, goodness, almost every region and area. Yes. Every area is using it, and states using it. So, but as a judge, I want to give you one more crack. If you are an expert in competition suite, you can close your eyes as I talk. But if you still need some training, 2 things. I'm going to give you a crash course. Hopefully you feel good about it, and we're going to talk about it for about 20, 25 minutes. At the end of that, if you still want more practice, you are more than welcome to send me an email. Every day, I run a fake contest. I can make you a judge for that fake contest that day. You can log in and actually make some fake recordings on the fake contest. And then you can feel good about what you're doing there, okay? So let's dive in. In competition suite, let's first talk about recommended equipment. The area hosts are going to provide this to you. They're either going to use a Samsung Galaxy Tab or they're going to use an iPad. If you have your own device and would prefer to use your own device, as long as you can get on the Wi-Fi, you're fine. What I mean is I personally like my own iPad. It's all set up. It's the way that I want it. It always works. So I will use that unless somebody tells me I can't get on their Wi-Fi. So that's the preference, but that's the device you'll have. On the next screen, it shows you a headset and a little adapter. I personally buy my own. On those important links at the bottom of underneath our video, you can click on it and find the Amazon link to purchase them. I think they're a total of $6 or $8 for everything that's there.
Those same two things, yes.
I buy them every year. I throw away the old ones just because I know that they wear out, and I don't want a band to have a recording that's cutting in and out. And so the areas will supply them to you, but if you would prefer to have your own, you are more than welcome to do that. I personally would rather have my own, but that's just me. Let's talk a little bit about the recommended equipment and what the app looks like. If you want to start playing with it now, you're going to download an app that looks like the one on the screen. It's called Competition Suite Judge, and it has those little gray dots and the orange dot and a little gavel. Once you get that, you are all already set up on Competition Suite. You'll see it says Judging, and it says University Interscholastic League. I've already got, I think everybody should be. If you don't, shoot me an email and I'll get you set up. But everybody should already be set up. Usually if you can't find your account, it's because it's under another email. Some of you, I have it under your school email. Some of you, it's under your personal. It depends on the one that you use for TMAA, since nearly all of you are TMAA members. The login process, as you look at that login screen where it says member login, you'll put in your email address and password. If you forgot your password because you haven't judged since last year, totally understandable. Click forgot password and it'll send it to you. If you've never signed up before, you can go sign up and it's totally free. Again, I've already done it with your email, so it'll probably say that, it'll probably link you to your account pretty quickly on there. On the next page, it kind of shows you what things will look like, but I used one here that has different organizations, right? You'll have the organizations, which that's if you host a marching contest. Some of you do. Some of you are judges, but you also host a marching contest. So that'll show there. Groups are your groups. So for me, it might show some of the Capel groups that are in there. Under judging, it'll show the groups that you judge for. In the case of the one on the screen, I have when I judge for Colorado or when I judge for DCI, those are in there. University Interscholastic League will show as one of the organizations that you're now judging for, okay? You can click on that organization and you'll see the little UIL logo and go from there. Now, let's talk about on the tablet side, what does Competition Suite really look like? Inside of the Judge app, you're going to click on that same app. I want to point out to you, and if you'll put up the screen that has all the sheets on it in the big orange box, for area, we are no longer using written sheets. Okay. Now, if you're a returning judge, this was, unless you judged that one particular area that used them last year, I think it was 2A Area B, unless you were on that one, you didn't use sheets last year either. My expectation would be, if we're not using sheets, that gives you longer to talk. It gives you a better way to manage your numbers in Competition Suite. But this is just kind of what we'll have pre-printed sheets for you to look at, but you're not filling them out for every band. Going on to the next slide. Usually, you can log into the contest about a week to 10 days ahead of time. If you go there now, I don't think you're going to see it, okay? But about a week to 10 days ahead of time, you will see the contest populate, and it'll look just like that. In this case, it says August 22nd, and it has a contest in there, right? And I can see it. From there, on the next slide, if you log in as a judge, it'll go right to your screen, and that screen will have prelims and finals. If you can go forward to that orange box screen with prelims and finals. From there, you're going to be able to judge your way straight down the line. It is super, super simple to make your way through. You can see on this example that's here, there's a 200 points in there for ensemble performance, woodwinds 150. I can just give the score that they need. I'm going to caution you about the green verify button. Last year, some of you typed in the score and treated verify like enter. Verify is not an enter button. No. If you press verify, it locks that score and you may not edit it for the rest of the show unless somebody on the tabulator side unlocks it. All you have to do is type the number and just leave it. It records it as soon as you type it. okay? You don't have to press verify. Verify is for at the very end of the contest to lock down your numbers.
So
okay?
in the old days, this would be the equivalent of holding your sheets.
Yes.
So we're holding sheets and we're able to kind of manipulate them. Nobody, bands just hear their comments. They don't get to see a score until the very end of the prelims, finals, etc. So this helps you move things around. Oh, I got to move somebody by 5 points. You'll have that luxury until it's the verification period.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so you'll see on the next slide, can you go to the one where Westwood is highlighted in orange? For example, as I start the group, and this is the very start of a 6A contest, I have Westwood highlighted there in orange. And from there, I can see the boxes. I'll click on each box, and when I click on it, a little calculator window pops up, and it allows me to give them a score. But before I do that, I'm going to record. Where do I see the record? Do you see where it says Westwood, and there's a little thumbs up score? Look just to the right of that. Do you see the record icon? Go to the next slide. When I click on that record icon, it takes you to this screen that says record commentary. You can tap pause if needed. I so appreciate knowing that, because sometimes I'm not sure about, I do my intro. This is Jerry Miller, excited to be here with you. I'm judging music, 40-yard line, da-da-da, and then I go, oh, wait, yes, pause, and
Not
then I
stop.
wait until the group, not stop, right. It tells me I can press pause if needed, and so I'll press that orange record button. Well, but Jerry, how do I know it's recording? Well, number one, you see the little timer going, right? The seconds are counting. Number two, do you see on the right-hand side there's a little VU meter? It's in gray. It's a little hard to see because I'm not making any sound on this one. But that VU meter will be bouncing as you talk. You'll see it bounce through the levels. And so you're like, okay, cool, it's on, and I'm recording. On the next slide, I have those highlighted for you. You can see the timer is moving. You can see there's also, and I didn't mention this, a little recording with an orange dot that appears there, and you can see that VU meter is pegged. So that's how you know you're recording for that group. You can pause if you need to, but other than that, you leave it recording the whole time. When you get to the very end, you're going to press stop. Go to the next slide. On the next slide, do you see when I press stop, the little microphone changed to that kind of greenish blue color, and it says all set. The commentary has been recorded and will be sent to the groups shortly, right? Once I press that, it's going out to those bands and they're able to. Now, as Mark said, they're not going to see your score, but they are going to get your commentary pretty quickly.
Could you back up one slide?
Yeah.
Over on the left, this is kind of a pro tip at the bottom. If the tablet goes to sleep, it will continue recording. Don't worry. In fact, in some ways, you kind of want it to. If you are doing something and kind of bump it around and accidentally hit a button, if it just goes dark, it's still recording. And the information doesn't get lost, I promise you. And so I've worried about that before. And then you just basically wake it back up and you can close it down. But if not, you can, I like to sometimes have it open where I'm just watching during the performance. Okay, the clock is still running. It's good to see. But again, just don't worry if it goes dark. It's not shut off. Sure. It's just going into the visual silent mode.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go on a couple more slides. You'll then enter your score, and you'll see on top, this is kind of similar to what I showed you before for Westwood here. I put in a 200 here and a 150 and whatnot, and you'll just go down. You will not verify your scores after every group, okay? Because that, as Mark said, it's like holding your sheets. We don't want you to put everything out there all at once, so do not click verify under each one. If you go forward 2 slides to the 6A worksheet, when you are all done, the whole day, last band, all finished, sip of water, I'm going to go ahead and lock this down. You're going to click on the worksheet. It's at the very bottom of the whole big column stack is worksheet, and it's going to launch this screen for you. It's going to show Round Rock, I have Reagan, and I have Keller here, and you'll go through there, and under Ensemble, you have a number, and it'll have everything all totaled out for you. If you scroll all the way down on that, and if you'll go to the next slide, you'll see it'll eventually give you the option. Do you see that in the upper right, that greenish verify all? You can do one of two things. You can either use, do you see the verify checks in green next to every group? You can go one group at a time. You can look at your tote sheet that you were writing on, or verify, yes, yes, yes. Or you can scan the whole thing at once, make sure it's all correct, and then hit verify all. The reason we want you to verify all is because then nothing can change. everything is locked and loaded, and they can have the director's meeting and everything can be tabulated, okay? So if you accidentally verify too early, you can leave it if you don't ever go back and touch that score. But if you need to, somebody has to go unlock it for you, and you have to go back in. So I always say wait till the very end to verify. Now, sometimes you may find you're getting to like 3 groups from the end, 2 groups from the end. You have a little bit of downtime. You may go up and verify a couple of them just to save yourself some time. But again, by the time the last band has finished off the field, maybe give yourself 5 or 10 minutes, and you need to have all the scores verified.
Did we do okay in the Keller score there?
Yes.
I think we win all captions, I believe.
Yes, sir. First place.
Awesome.
And then in green, verified, you'll see it'll change to a green check on that next slide, and that's how you know you're all good. We've been talking about this a little while, about what does the recap look like. If you can pull up the slide that has the big recap with the UIL logo, this is what the new recaps look like. This is from state in 2021. I want you to notice inside of this recap, are you seeing that they can see every single subcaption number we give, the raw score and the ranking, right? So they see the raw score and the rank. And this is why that numbers management piece is so crucial. Because if we tied everybody across the board, that would be a problem. Now, this is a state recap, so there aren't quite as many subcaption boxes. But when you look at this, you want to make sure that you are being as clear as possible with how you individually ranked and rated and gave a number for every subcaption, because the transparency is higher than it has ever been. And I don't say that to make you nervous. I just say that to inform you that the transparency is very, very high when it comes time to do this. Okay? I'm going to look real quick. We are about to take our 5th quiz. I'm going to say this now because we're getting close to wrapping up and we're a little on the early side. So I'm going to say this before I start quiz number 5. First off, was there anything else about Competition Suite we didn't say that's worth mentioning? I know you and I have been using it for many years.
Sure. I love the archive feature of it. I've gone back many times and listened to different contests I've evaluated, not only for myself, but be able to kind of give a refresher. If you're still new to it, I promise you, just embrace it. The screen is really easy to see. I'm going to record here. I'm going to push stop here. I'm going to record my scores here. One thing to kind of notice is as you progress to band number 2, you do need to make sure on the far left-hand side you do progress to number 2. I don't think it necessarily knocks out the recording or how that would work.
Does not.
But it would be like, okay, something's not working. Just go to the band like it says, and then you'll have that new fresh screen for them. Just progress along with the ensemble.
Yeah, and I'll stress Mark's point. No recordings get lost. Like, even if you record 5 files for the same band, a tabulator can easily go in, and I can click, and I hear, again, let's say you were meaning to make a recording for Capel, and you accidentally made a recording for Keller, and I heard the beginning of it. I can just click on the beginning of that, and I can say move to, and I can click on the school I want to move it to. So the other ones, sometimes they go, are my recordings coming through? Even if you lose Wi-Fi, they save locally on the tablet. They're not going anywhere. They're local on the tablet. And then when Wi-Fi is reestablished, it will go through. Using it for state and using it for, we've used it state for 3 years now, and I think one file, and it was just about a minute of a file, got lost. And it went silent for a minute. And I think it was a headset malfunction where maybe it became unplugged just a little bit. But
it's a great percentage.
Yeah, I mean, we have so few issues. So I don't want you to be nervous about it. But if you are somebody who just technology-wise, you're like, Jerry, I am a practicer, I want to practice, then you tell me a day. Say, on Thursday of this week, can I be a judge? And I will make you a judge of this fake contest that we run every day. Executive secretaries ask us to run it, so we run it every day. There's a fake contest. I will make you a judge for that day, and you will see your name. You can record fake commentary. You can enter fake scores. You can do the whole deal, and then you can send me a note and say, does all that look cool? So if you're nervous about it, just tell me a day this week or next week that you would like to be a judge at the fake contest, and I will make you a judge at the fake contest, okay? So we're going to pause for quiz 5. As we pause for quiz 5, if you have a question, maybe before you take quiz 5, you can post your question to the chat. And we're looking at the chat live here. Other than that, you're going to take quiz 5. At the conclusion of quiz 5, you are done. Your training has been completed for another year to judge area. So again, if you're a new judge, you've been with me for 3.5 hours now. I'm sure you're sick of listening to Mark and I talk.
We're going to go watch football now. So
That's right. Go enjoy some NFL. If you are a returning judge, we had a short, just kind of recap numbers. We had some exemplars. I am going to send you an email about exemplars and remind you to go there. And let me tell you, as you're doing this region judging over the next several weeks, which is going to start up in early October, I'm going to be listening to your region files because I need some region exemplars. So I want you to knock it out of the park because we only had 2 or 3 region contests that piloted it, so we don't have a lot to choose from right now. I sacrificed myself. I threw one in there that I did just so you'd have it, and I'm going to go find that old Randy Vaughn one that I talked about earlier that I think is so good. I'm going to drop that in. So if you have a great region file you want to use as an exemplar, send it to me because we could use some right now. But we'll continue to build that. But yeah. Great. Mr. Vetter said the example earlier was Mark Nicholson from China Spring. Yes, it was. It was really good. So thanks. All right. We are going to post quiz number 5. Let's go ahead and post that right now on the screen. And you may begin taking quiz number 5 if you haven't already. And if you have a question, I'll monitor the chat. Once you're done with quiz number 5, you're welcome to log off. Yeah. Hey, Scott, I saw your question on here about the quizzes. So if you can't find your name, go to the very last selection below the last name on there, and it says I can't find my name, and then you can type it in the next box. So, yeah, it's all the way down at the bottom. If you can't find your name, go to the very last selection and choose I can't find my name, and then in question number 2, which is an optional question, you're going to type your name, and that way I'll get you credit. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for your commitment to provide feedback to the bands in our state. This has just continued and continued and continued to grow, and the quality of judging, the quality of commentary. I mean, I'll tell you, just looking for exemplars, it was easy to find great judges at every step of the way. So thank you all so much for what you are about to do. I know I'll speak for Mark on this. I think you can ask any of us over email any questions that you have as you get closer. And certainly if you want to practice competition suite, you can let me know. But just thank you for what you do. And
yeah, we appreciate your professionalism, your dedication. I always mention this whenever I have a chance to talk to anyone. The best bands in the state deserve the best adjudication. They deserve the best folks that are trained as dedicated to the skill of making this happen and trying to give the best tapes, trying to give them the fairest read, and it just makes an incredible experience. As we all know, the groups, the directors, the students, the design staff have put so much into this. It's been an unbearably hot summer, and we want to definitely reward them, celebrate them as much as we can, but also show, hey, here's where we think you are, and we want to continue to see you progress. This has been great, and I definitely want to say thank you, Jerry. You just put so much effort into this. We started with a small germ of an idea, and it's really progressed, but now the training aspect of it has been so progressive, trying to give you the tools. So hopefully it's less intimidating, and again, we are totally accessible. If you want to email us and let us know, say, hey, I'm still not sure on this, what could you do? And we'll be glad to either visit over the phone or email or in person. Let us know.
Yep. Have a great fall, and we look forward to seeing you at lots of area contests in the coming weeks. Bye, everyone.